Chapter 1196. In the sky above the Divine Child Palaces, the Yuan Qi clouds turned into Yuan Qi light beams and shot down, eventually disappearing. In the secret room of Palace Jintian, there was a circle of white light flowing around the blood-red cocoon. That was the last of the Yuan Qi light beams, which seeped into the blood-red cocoon. The blood-red cocoon also began to shrink, gradually shrinking. Eventually, it turned into a layer of skin covering the body. The light beams shone brightly, as if the sun was shining. The light beams shot out like swords, filling the entire secret room. After a while, the light faded and a perfect body appeared. Every muscle in the body was superfluous, and every muscle was insufficient. The perfect ratio, perfect skin color, and perfect muscles were enough to make countless women scream. Thump, 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 thump after thump came from the chest. With the steady and powerful thump of the heart, waves of vitality emerged from the heart, along with the blood, and flowed to every part of the body, nourishing, and strengthening. The body seemed to have woken up from a deep sleep. The vitality gradually spread. The eyelids of the closed eyes trembled and slowly opened. At first, there was confusion about the outside world, as if he did not know what was going on. In an instant, the confusion in the eyes disappeared, and was replaced by sobriety. A light called wisdom bloomed in the depths of the pupils, spreading and shooting out a bright light. His consciousness returned, and he took control of the body. With a slight movement, a silver-white robe appeared out of thin air and covered his perfect body. Chu Mu stood up and stood up. His 5 fingers clenched gently, and a strong and shocking explosion sound came from his palm. He did not use much strength, but it felt like he could even crush a mountain. Nirvana Realm. The body of a first sky of Nirvana Realm was so strong, shocking, and unparalleled. Perhaps it was not just a figment of his imagination that he could destroy a mountain with one punch. Because Chu Mu cultivated both chi and body, his Nirvana realm was 10 times harder than that of a swordsman who cultivated alone. The amount of Nirvana chi he needed to use was also 10 times more. The price was huge, but the reward was also huge. Now, with the strength of my body alone, I can contend against a first sky of Nirvana realm swordsman, Chu Mu said to himself. After Nirvana, his physique was more than 10 times stronger. The current him could easily kill the previous him. The divine wilderness sword essence had also undergone a qualitative change. It was purer and more powerful. The corrosive power within it was also more powerful. Chu Mu took a deep breath, and a whistling sound rang out. All the air in the cultivation room was sucked into Chu Mu's lungs, creating countless small cyclones that whistled. This was a phenomenon that could only be caused when one's attainments in body refinement reached a certain level. Legend had it that those experts with incomparably profound attainments in the Tao of body refinement could reverse rivers and replace the sun and moon with a single roar. After practicing a set of fist techniques, strength surged and transmitted within his muscles, gathering and erupting at his fist, causing the air within the training room to vibrate, as if it was about to explode and shatter. Taking out a high-grade saint sword, he activated the divine wilderness sword essence and poured it into the sword. The sword trembled slightly, and Chu Mu carefully observed the changes in the sword. After Nirvana, the divine wilderness sword essence's power was several times stronger than before Nirvana. Naturally, its corrosive power would also increase. But as for the specifics, Chu Mu was still unclear, so he needed to conduct some experiments to understand. With the divine wilderness sword essence pouring in, the high-grade saint sword's body soon began to change. The change was not very clear, but Chu Mu could feel it. The originally blazing sword slowly dimmed. Gradually, mottled spots appeared on it, as if it was rusted. Finally, it was so rusted that one could easily break it with a stretch of his hand. This had to do with Chu Mu's powerful physique and shocking strength. It was also because this high-quality sacred sword was crippled. A high-grade saint sword is no longer suitable for me. Chu Mu frowned. A high-grade saint's sword was suitable for the high-grade sword of Gojoseon, and was also barely suitable for low-grade Nirvana realm swordsmen. The value of a top-grade saint's sword far exceeded that of a high-grade saint's sword. Most low-grade Nirvana realm swordsmen did not have a top-grade saint's sword to use. The corrosive power of the divine wilderness sword essence had greatly increased, and a high-grade saint's sword could not withstand it for a long time. Chumu had to find a top-grade saint's sword. He had never used a top-grade saint's sword before, so he did not know how much a top-grade saint's sword could withstand the divine wilderness sword essence. There were two methods. One was to find a top-grade saint's sword, and the other was to upgrade the undying sword. Both methods had to be carried out, because Chumu was proficient in dual swords, and a perfect dual sword technique would double his battle strength. The increase was very obvious, and the prerequisite to using dual sword technique was 2 swords. The body after Nirvana was different from the body before Nirvana. Chumu carefully sensed his body, from top to bottom, from outside to outside. He carefully sensed every inch of his body. The body after Nirvana had been reborn. Every inch of his flesh and blood had been broken and reconstructed. It was a combination of flesh and blood that had been broken and reconstructed under the cleansing of Nirvana Chi and rich heaven-earth Yuan Chi. Every inch of his flesh and blood faintly emitted a faint luster, containing astonishing power. Now, my cultivation has reached the first heavenly layer of Nirvana. My body refinement attainments have also reached the first heavenly layer of Nirvana. I can cultivate the second level of the astral calamity cultivation technique, but in other aspects, I am still lacking compared to the veteran Nirvana realm swordsman. Chumu thought to himself. The Nirvana realm was the end of the creation realm, but it was also a new starting point. It was the starting line of competition for genius swordsmen. The Nirvana realm was not only about one's body, but also one's spirit. Every swordsman who could advance to the Nirvana realm was extraordinary. They had a deeper understanding of themselves, how to better unleash all of their strength, how to better gather all of their strength, and how to better combine all of their strength into one. In terms of the understanding of power, a Nirvana realm swordsman had a deeper understanding of power than a swordsman below the Nirvana realm. Moreover, with the passage of time, this understanding would continue to deepen and strengthen, becoming more and more powerful. The benefits of Nirvana were not only a deeper understanding of one's own body and a deeper control of power, but also a clearer sense of the power of the heavens and earth. Even without concentrating, Chumu could clearly feel the fluctuations of power that filled the heavens and earth. In this case, it was not difficult to comprehend the power of the heavens and earth. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder, cloud, space. These 10 types of power of the heavens and earth were exceptionally clear. It was as if he could capture them with his mind. Among these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth, there were 2 types of power of the heavens and earth, which had not been successfully transformed into the power of rules. They were still at the level of ultimacy. Originally, it was very difficult to transform them into the power of rules, but now Chumu felt that as long as he was willing, he could successfully transform these 2 types of power of ultimacy into the power of rules after a period of meditation. He could also clearly feel that there were other types of power of the heavens and earth that were different from these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth. Although they were not as clear as these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth, they were not vague either. Chumu felt that as long as he was willing, he could also comprehend them in a short period of time. For example, the fluctuations of the power of the stars, the power of light, the power of darkness, and so on. The heavens and earth were filled with many types of power of the heavens and earth. Some were clear and some were vague, but Chumu could feel many types. However, he was not willing to comprehend them because the more power of the heavens and earth he comprehended, the more time it would take. The current 10 types of power of the heavens and earth were enough because Chu-Mu had yet to fully tap into the potential of these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth. Mastering more power of the heavens and earth was called erudition. Working hard on one type of power of the heavens and earth to fully tap into its potential was called mastery. Erudition and mastery were two different directions. They could not be synchronized. Pursuing erudition meant grasping more, but mastery was more difficult. Pursuing mastery meant going deeper and deeper, unable to grasp more, because time was limited. The comprehension of the power of the heavens and earth was not everything for a swordsman. The cultivation of a swordsman included sword origin, sword arts, power of the heavens and earth, sword intent, and so on. They all had to be involved in all aspects. Furthermore, some swordsmen would cultivate other types of power, such as body refinement. Every swordsman's time was basically fixed. Similarly, there were 24 hours in a day. There were 360 days in a year. During this time, they had to be spread out and used to cultivate several aspects. They could not miss a single one. If one focused on a single aspect, they were destined to not be able to go far. This was because the height of the barrel was different. The amount of water that could be stored was always limited. The lowest edge was the standard, not the highest. The reason why Chu-Mu was able to sense the power of the heavens and earth so clearly was due to his extraordinary sixth sense. Other Nirvana realm swordsmen might not be able to sense as clearly as him. However, no matter what was said, no Nirvana realm swordsman would recklessly comprehend the power of the heavens and earth, unless they were stupid. Otherwise, the more they comprehended, the more time they would have to invest. They would become more and more scattered, resulting in nothing on the path of cultivation. Chu-Mu thought for a moment. He felt that if he wanted to comprehend the power of the heavens and earth, his first choice would be the power of the stars. This was because his body refinement cultivation technique, astral calamity, absorbed the power of the stars. Perhaps comprehending the power of the stars and astral calamity body refinement cultivation technique could complement each other. However, that was a matter for the future. Right now, the most important thing was to transform the profound of ice and the profound of cloud into the power of law. He sat down cross-legged and focused his consciousness. He removed all distracting thoughts and focused on the profound of ice. The other power of the heavens and earth seemed to retreat. Chu-Mu's surroundings were filled with intense power of the heavens and earth. The power of the heavens and earth revolved around Chu-Mu, sparkling and translucent. The power of the heavens and earth was constantly being absorbed by Chu-Mu. It entered his spiritual world and tempered the profound of ice, causing the profound of ice to transform. After reaching the Nirvana realm, Chu-Mu's spiritual strength had become even stronger. His perception and control of the power of the heavens and earth had also increased by several times. The profound of ice was constantly being tempered by the power of the heavens and earth that was pouring into his spiritual world, transforming bit by bit. Chapter 1197. Inside the heaven-shaking hall's secluded secret room, the temperature of the air was very, very low. On the ground and walls, there were countless white frost marks that were sparkling and translucent. Layer after layer, it was as if it was a world of ice and snow, emitting a biting cold air. A layer of frost also appeared on the surface of Chu-Mu's body. His sideburns and the tips of his eyebrows were all covered in frost, like stars. Suddenly, Chu-Mu opened his eyes. In an instant, there seemed to be an ice flower blooming in the depths of his pupils. In a breath, the frost on his body dissipated. Soon after, the frost on the floor and walls also melted, vanishing into thin air. In his spiritual world, the profound of ice had completely transformed into the law of ice. After succeeding, Chu-Mu did not stop. In the secret chamber, wisps of clouds suddenly appeared out of thin air. They gradually became denser, forming a cloud-like mist. They filled the air like a sea. The profound of clouds, the power of clouds. After nirvana, there would be a period of time to consolidate before coming out of seclusion. When the 8 shensis all came out of seclusion, Chu Mu had not yet. This was because his profound of clouds was still in the process of transforming. The Grand Elders all knew that Chu Mu was still in seclusion and nothing unexpected had happened. Therefore, they all fell silent and relaxed. After coming out of seclusion, the 8 shensis all began to discuss. Different people had different feelings towards nirvana, so it was necessary to communicate with each other. 10th brother should have succeeded in nirvana by now. After the discussion, their topic shifted to Chu Mu. This was because they already knew that the situation during their nirvana could not be compared to Chu Mu's 9 miles 9 yuan chi cloud. Speaking of this, they were very surprised. A 9 miles 9 yuan chi cloud was an achievement that far surpassed the first shensi, Guan Lin's. I think he should have comprehended something and is still in seclusion. After a period of time, Chu Mu's figure could not be seen in the secret chamber that was filled with clouds. Suddenly, the clouds seemed to be blown by a strong wind, boiling and gradually converging at a point until they disappeared, revealing Chu Mu's figure. The profound of clouds had successfully transformed into the law of cloud. At this point, the 10 types of forces of heaven and earth that Chu Mu had mastered had all transformed into the power of laws. Among them, the power of laws of metal, wood, fire, water, wind, lightning, and space had all reached the minute subtlety level. The 3 types of laws of frozen cloud and earth were still at the basic level. Since his cultivation had been consolidated and Bing Yun's 2 profound meanings had successfully transformed into the power of laws, Chu Mu came out of seclusion. 10th brother, you've finally come out of seclusion. Feng Guohai came to look for Chu Mu. After nirvana, everyone's aura underwent a subtle change. It was the same for Feng Guohai and Chu Mu. 9th brother, you must have gained a lot from your nirvana this time, Chu Mu said with a smile. Your harvest must be more than mine. Feng Guohai smiled and said, Come, let's go to the Plethora Treasure Palace to pick out some treasures. Pick treasures at the Plethora Treasure Palace? Chu Mu was stunned, confused. Now that we've broken through to the Nirvana realm, our old swords and weapons are no longer suitable for us. Therefore, we need new swords. Also, we need some treasures that are useful to us. Feng Guohai said, The other brothers have already picked the treasures that they're satisfied with. Only you and I are left. Chu Mu immediately understood that Feng Guohai's main reason for staying until now was to go with him, or rather, to bring him along so that he would not be in the dark. Then let's go, 9th brother. Chu Mu smiled, understanding what was going on. Chu Mu was grateful, but he was not a sentimental person, nor was he good at expressing his feelings. He could only remember them. The Plethora Treasure Palace was on Sword God's floating island, located in a corner of the main divine hall. It was where all sorts of treasures were stored in the main divine hall. It was covered with countless powerful seals and was guarded by experts. Even if a high-level sword saint wanted to force his way in, he would only end up dead. 9th Son of God, 10th Son of God. There were 2 deacons guarding outside the Plethora Treasure Palace. Both of them possessed the strength of saint level, but they were saints who had reached the limit of their talent and had basically exhausted all their potential. It was almost impossible for them to advance further in their lifetime. Therefore, they would feel respect from the bottom of their hearts for the divine children who were extremely talented and had great potential. Even though the current divine children were no different from ants in their eyes. Chu Mu and Feng Guohai bowed to the 2 deacons as well. Then, the 2 deacons opened the door of the Plethora Treasure Palace, allowing Chu Mu and Feng Guohai to enter. Once they entered the Plethora Treasure Palace, they could smell the scent of treasures as soon as they took a breath. The Plethora Treasure Palace was not called so for nothing. They felt lost. The Plethora Treasure Palace was like a small world of its own. It was like a vast galaxy with countless treasures floating within. 10th brother, I'm going to find a few suitable treasures and a suitable supreme grade saint sword. You go on your own, Feng Guohai said. All right, Chu Mu answered. The two of them separated. Chu Mu began his search as well. First, he needed to find a supreme-grade saint sword. It would be best if it could withstand more divine wilderness sword energies. Then, he would look for other treasures that were useful to him. The plethora treasure palace was completely open to the divine children. This was the privilege of the divine children, but as a divine child, they could not abuse their privilege and only take a portion of the treasures that were truly useful to them instead of taking everything they saw. That would cause unnecessary trouble for those who came in later. Feng Guohai knew how to act appropriately, and so did Chu Mu. There was a section for swords. The swords that could be collected by the main divine hall were all extraordinary in terms of their grade. They were all the best of their grade. Chu Mu's goal was the supreme grade saint sword. Soon, he came to the section where the swords were stored. Many swords floated in the air, emitting rays of sharp light. The sharp aura was like a sword, and the formless sword chi spiraled in the air. The area within tens of thousands of meters seemed to have turned into a land of death. Chu Mu entered the area and felt a chill run down his spine as soon as he stepped into the section of swords. It felt like the sword chi was about to touch him and cut his body. Fortunately, he was a Nirvana realm swordsman. Even though he was only in the early stage of the first Nirvana realm, he could withstand it. If it had been before, it would have been difficult. With a glance, Chu Mu's divine sense poured out. His divine sense after Nirvana had undergone some changes as well. It was even more powerful. In addition to Chu Mu's special nature, his first Nirvana realm divine sense was comparable to, or even slightly superior to, an ordinary third Nirvana realm swordsman. In the section of swords, the weakest were the saint swords. Low-grade saint swords, mid-grade saint swords, upper-grade saint swords. Chu Mu's divine sense swept across them. Sure enough, every saint sword had its own uniqueness. They were all the best among their peers. These must be the supreme-grade saint swords, Chu Mu thought. These swords had surpassed upper-grade saint swords in terms of aura. However, Chu Mu felt that they hadn't surpassed upper-grade saint swords by too much. They should be supreme-grade saint swords. There were thousands of supreme-grade saint swords. It wasn't a lot. Chu Mu also discovered that there were other swords above supreme-grade saint swords. They were swords whose aura surpassed supreme-grade saint swords. Could that be the sky-piercing saint sword? A thought popped up in Chu Mu's mind. The sky-piercing saint sword had another name. It was a sword that surpassed supreme-grade saint swords but was inferior to spiritual swords. The swords above supreme-grade saint swords were spiritual swords. Legend had it that swords had spirituality, which was why they were called spiritual swords. The difference between the sky-piercing saint sword and spiritual swords was only in terms of spirituality. There was no difference in terms of quality. Simply put, the sky-piercing saint sword was a spiritual sword without spirituality. Only saint-level experts could wield spiritual swords. Without saint-level strength, one couldn't refine spiritual swords and couldn't withstand the power of spiritual swords. The sky-piercing saint sword was even rarer than supreme-grade saint swords. There were only a few dozen of them, and each one was different. Further up was a sword that surpassed the sky-piercing saint sword. It had a trace of spirituality, as if it was alive. Chu Mu knew that it was a spiritual sword. Spiritual swords weren't something he could withstand. There was no need to look further. Chu Mu's original goal was supreme-grade saint swords. However, after seeing the sky-piercing saint sword, he was moved. In terms of quality and material, the sky-piercing saint sword was far superior to supreme-grade saint swords and even superior-grade saint swords. Look, there were thousands of supreme-grade saint swords and only a few dozen sky-piercing saint swords. The difference of 100 times meant that the value of the sky-piercing saint sword was at least 100 times that of a supreme-grade saint sword. It was extremely rare. Chu Mu's spiritual sense locked onto the dozens of sky-piercing saint swords. He carefully examined each and every one of them. Supreme grade Saint swords were suitable for Nirvana realm swordsmen. Low and middle level Nirvana realm swordsmen could mainly use them. High level Nirvana realm swordsmen could also use them. However, some high level Nirvana realm swordsmen with background or fortuitous encounters would use the sky-piercing Saint sword. Some sword saints would also use the sky-piercing Saint sword as a weapon. After all, spiritual swords were very rare and precious. Not all sky-piercing Saint swords were suitable for a swordsman. This was because the power of heaven and earth that every swordsman grasped, the sword arts that they cultivated and other aspects were different. Chu Mu wanted to find a sky-piercing Saint sword that could significantly increase his strength. There was a sky-piercing Saint sword that contained pure gold energy. It was incomparably sharp and seemed to be able to cut through everything. There was a sky-piercing Saint sword that seemed to be compressed by a volcano. Its scorching heat could burn the world. There was a sky-piercing Saint sword that seemed to be refined by an iceberg. Its cold chi could freeze 3,000 miles. There was a sky-piercing Saint sword that seemed to be formed by thousands of thunderbolts. Its sword could destroy the world. Chu Mu discovered that the sky-piercing Saint sword was relatively pure. It wasn't like other Saint swords that could increase 2, 3, or even 4 types of heaven and earth power. This might be because the forging of the sky-piercing Saint sword was different from other Saint swords. Chu Mu had never forged a Saint sword before. Therefore, he didn't know anything about the forging of the sky-piercing Saint sword. He could only guess. Chapter 1198. Each sky-piercing Saint sword emitted a shocking aura. Chu Mu's divine remembrance immediately felt all sorts of sensations the moment it came in contact with them. It was either sliced apart by an incomparably sharp sword, burned by a terrifyingly high temperature, frozen by a terrifying cold, or blown away by a violent wind. Each time, a portion of Chu Mu's divine sense would be depleted. After just checking a dozen heavenly connecting Saint swords, Chu Mu felt that his divine sense was almost depleted. He quickly retracted it and stood where he was, calming his mind and recovering his divine sense. Choosing a sword that he was satisfied with was not an easy task. Chu Mu was patient enough. After his divine sense was fully recovered, Chu Mu continued to check. He was not satisfied with the heavenly connecting Saint swords from before. After scanning a dozen more swords, his divine sense was almost depleted again. Chu Mu had to replenish it again. 10th brother, so you're here. Have you found a Saint sword that you're satisfied with? A voice came from behind. Not yet, said Chu Mu. This is the heavenly connecting Saint sword. Feng Guohai was surprised. 10th brother, are you going to choose the heavenly connecting Saint sword? I am, said Chu Mu. It's not easy. It's extremely difficult for a low-level Nirvana realm cultivator to use the heavenly connecting Saint sword, said Feng Guohai. Chu Mu understood this as well. The heavenly connecting Saint sword was above supreme grade Saint swords. To use it, the swordsman must be capable enough to wield it. I'll try, said Chu Mu. Another name for the heavenly connecting Saint sword was faux spirit sword. Swords had spirituality, so there were spirit swords. To use a spirit sword, one had to refine it first. This was different from a saint sword. Although the heavenly connecting Saint sword had the word Saint sword, it did not belong to the level of a saint sword nor a spirit sword. It was somewhere in between the two. However, there was one thing that was similar to a spirit sword. It had to be refined. It was almost impossible for a low-level Nirvana realm swordsman to refine the heavenly connecting Saint sword. Right after eldest sister achieved Nirvana, she chose the heavenly connecting sacred sword as well. She managed to refine it in the end. Your talent and potential are above eldest sisters. I think you can refine the heavenly connecting sacred sword as well, Feng Guohai said, as if he had thought of something. The eldest sister referred to the first son of God, Guan Lin. When Chu Mu found out that Guan Lin was a swordswoman, he was quite surprised. In the world of swordsmen, powerful swordswomen were rare. Chu Mu was also curious about Guan Lin, the first divine child and their elder sister in name. He had not seen Guan Lin since he had arrived. Feng Guohai seemed to be implying that other than Guan Lin, the other gods' children did not have the ability to refine the heavenly piercing sacred sword. Naturally, they would not choose the sword. Take your time. I'll look for a suitable supreme-grade holy sword as well, said Feng Guohai. He had set his sights on supreme-grade holy swords instead of the heavenly connecting saint's sword. At the very least, he would have to wait until his cultivation had broken through to the middle stage of Nirvana realm before he could consider the heavenly saint's sword. Chu Mu's divine sense recovered and he released it again, locking onto a heavenly connecting sacred sword. The shocking sharpness seemed to have shredded his divine sense into pieces. However, the sharpness was not the sharpness of the power of metal. It was a pure sharpness, a sharpness that belonged to the sword itself. Under the sharpness, the heavenly connecting sacred swords around him seemed to have retreated. With a thought, Chu Mu decided on the spot to choose the heavenly connecting sacred sword. The extreme and pure sharpness satisfied him. He did not check the other heavenly connecting sacred swords, choosing it right away. Perhaps there would be better ones later on, or perhaps not, but it would be fine as long as he could find a suitable one that he was satisfied with. He strengthened his divine sense and formed an invisible hand, grabbing at the heavenly connecting sacred sword. The sharpness radiating from the heavenly connecting sacred sword was shocking. It was as if the invisible sword was about to slice apart Chu Mu's hand of divine sense. If it were any other first heaven of Nirvana realm swordsmen, their divine sense would definitely be sliced apart. However, Chu Mu's divine sense surpassed that of an ordinary third heaven of Nirvana realm swordsman. He grabbed the heavenly connecting sacred sword and pulled with force. In an instant, a terrifying sharpness approached. Chu Mu's hair stood on end, feeling as if his body was about to be sliced apart. His expression changed instantly. He reached out and the invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy gathered in his palm. He grabbed the hilt of the heavenly connecting sacred sword. The shocking sharpness seemed to have broken through the defense of the invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy, piercing Chu Mu's palm painfully. What a sharp sword! Chu Mu's eyes were filled with amazement. It was the first time he had seen such sharpness. If he were to refine such a sword, the increase in his strength would be very obvious. To a swordsman, a suitable and powerful sword was extremely important. Taking a deep breath, he increased the output of the invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy, tightly gripping the heavenly connecting sacred sword. Immediately after, Chu Mu activated a wisp of blood essence and spat it out from his mouth. It turned into a blood mist and quickly surrounded the heavenly connecting sacred sword. Just as the blood mist approached, it was shattered by the sharpness emitted by the sacred sword. It dissipated and disappeared. Chu Mu frowned. It was indeed difficult. He spat out another mouthful of blood essence, and it turned into a blood mist that surrounded the sacred sword. This time, Chu Mu used the assistance of his divine sense, but it was still defeated by the terrifying sharpness of the sacred sword. Blood essence was not ordinary blood. After spitting out 2 mouthfuls, it was also consumed. After brewing for a while, Chu Mu spat out a 3rd mouthful of blood essence. The blood mist spread out, but it did not rush towards the sacred sword. Instead, under the control of Chu Mu's divine sense, it merged with the power of the invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy. After the various powers merged, the blood mist became incomparably tough. It surged towards the heavenly connecting sacred sword. The terrifying sharpness protected the heavenly connecting sacred sword, preventing Chu Mu's blood mist from entering. For a moment, the two sides were in a confrontation. With the invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy opening a path, the heavenly connecting sacred sword's sharpness was pushed back bit by bit. After all, it was a pseudo-spiritual sword. If it was a spiritual sword, it would have its own spirituality. The current Chu Mu would definitely not be able to withstand it. The sharpness would directly destroy his invincible sword will and divine wilderness sword energy, and even injure his spiritual world. Even though it was only a pseudo-spiritual sword and did not possess spirituality, its material was not inferior to a spiritual sword. Its sharpness was shocking. In a short time, Chu Mu could not break it and let the blood mist come into contact with the sacred sword. Feng Guohai was on the other side, choosing a top-grade sacred sword. He did not notice Chu Mu's situation at all. Chu Mu immediately raised his invincible sword will to top-level divine grade. A top-level divine grade invincible sword will was much stronger than a high-level divine grade invincible sword will. It was as if a new force had been added, directly suppressing the sacred sword's sharpness by 30%, forcing it bit by bit. The continuous confrontation took half an hour. Only then did Chu Mu suppress the sacred sword's sharpness, allowing it to stick close to the sacred sword's body. However, the sharpness that was suppressed to the extreme was incomparably tough, making it even harder to break through. It was no wonder Feng Guohai said that among the godchildren, only the first godchild, Guan Lin, could barely refine the heavenly piercing sacred sword. With her mid-level divine grade sword intent and her other means, it was indeed possible for her to do so, but it would be very difficult. Although Chu Mu had resisted the sacred sword's sharpness for half an hour, it was only a little more than that. He did not feel that it was difficult. The invincible sword will and the divine wilderness sword essence merged into a sharp sword, forcefully piercing through the sacred sword's final sharpness. When it came into contact with the heavenly piercing sacred sword's body, Huang Xiaolong felt a chill and a faint tingling pain in his spiritual world. Under the control of his divine sense, the blood mist gathered and followed the trajectory of the invincible sword will and the divine wilderness sword essence. When it came into contact with the heavenly piercing sacred sword, it spread out and enveloped the sacred sword. It was as if the heavenly piercing sacred sword was defenseless, allowing Chu Mu's blood mist to seep into it. With the cooperation of various forces, Chu Mu's blood essence, blood mist, and divine sense seeped into the heavenly piercing sacred sword, refining it. The greatest difficulty in refining the heavenly piercing sacred sword was to break through that layer of sharpness. 15 minutes later, Chu Mu had successfully refined the heavenly piercing sacred sword. A faint connection was established between him and the sacred sword. As time passed, it gradually deepened. By removing the invincible sword will and the divine wilderness sword essence in his hand, the heavenly piercing sacred sword's sharpness would not cause him any harm. At the same time, Chu Mu also knew the name of the sword, Heaven Slash Sword. Its sharpness could even slice open the sky. The Heaven Slash sword had two characteristics. First, it was hard and extremely tough. It was more outstanding than ordinary heavenly piercing sacred sword. Second, it was sharp. It was shockingly sharp. The Heaven Slash sword was unable to amplify any heaven and earth powers, but it had the two characteristics of toughness and sharpness. It was also what Chu Mu liked the most. His right hand gripped the sword hilt tightly as he held the sword horizontally in front of his eyes. He carefully looked at every inch of the sword. The Heaven Slash sword's body was bright silver. It was an extremely pure color. It was not stained by dust, nor was it stagnant in water. There was a faint halo around it. That color and that sharpness made Chu Mu mesmerized. Gently and silently, it left behind a silver streak in the air. Good sword. Chu Mu smiled. It came from the bottom of his heart. He was extremely satisfied. Immediately, with a thought, the Heaven Slash sword disappeared. In Chu Mu's dantian, a sword appeared out of thin air. It floated above the divine wilderness sword essence lake. As it floated, it was constantly being refined by the divine wilderness sword essence. Immediately, Chu Mu's eyes lit up as he looked at the other heavenly piercing sacred swords. Dual sword technique required 2 swords. Now that he had obtained one, if he could obtain another one, his strength would become extremely terrifying when he used the dual sword technique. The greedy Chu Mu first completely recovered his spiritual sense. Then, he released his spiritual sense and checked again to find the next suitable heavenly piercing sacred sword. After recovering a few times, he did find another heavenly piercing sacred sword. Unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to refine it. It was probably because he had already refined one heavenly piercing sacred sword and his cultivation was not high enough. He was unable to withstand a second heavenly piercing sacred sword. Helpless, Chu Mu could only give up on the idea of a second heavenly connecting sacred sword. Instead, he left the sword region and went to the other treasure regions. He wanted to find other treasures that were useful to him and could better increase his strength. Chapter 1199. Feng Guohai left the 1,000 Treasure Palace first and waited outside. An hour later, Chu Mu appeared. 10th brother, you've had a good harvest, haven't you? Feng Guohai smiled. Not bad. Chu Mu nodded. 9th brother's harvest isn't bad either. That's for sure, Feng Guohai said. It could be seen that he had indeed had a good harvest as the smile on his face did not fade. Both of them did not ask about each other's harvest. They only needed to make sure that the other had had a good harvest. 10th brother, I'll go back and cultivate in seclusion for a while. See you later, Feng Guohai said. Chu Mu needed some time to sort out his harvest in the 1,000 Treasure Palace. After returning to the Zhentian Palace and informing Jiang Tao, Chu Mu entered the cultivation room. With a single thought, a pure and dazzling silver light bloomed in the air. The light illuminated the entire cultivation room in an instant. The coldness spread, enough to send chills down the spine of any swordsman below the Nirvana realm. They dared not look straight at it. The Heaven/Sword appeared in Chu Mu's right hand. Chu Mu's goal was to test the Heaven/Sword's ability to withstand the Divine Wilderness Sword energy. No matter how good the sword was, it would not last long if it could not withstand the erosion of the Divine Wilderness Sword energy. This experiment lasted a total of 16 hours. The Divine Desolate Sword essence constantly circulated around the Heavenly/Sword, going back and forth. Chu Mu also paid full attention to the changes in the Heavenly/Sword. After 16 hours, the color of the Heaven/Sword did not change at all. Chu Mu was certain that the Heaven/Sword did not change at all under the erosion of the Divine Wilderness Sword energy. It looks like the Heaven/Sword can be used for a very long time, Chu Mu thought to himself. Constantly changing swords was an extremely helpless method. To him, a suitable sword was harder to come by than other swordsmen. The reason why the Heaven Beheading Sword was not corroded by the Divine Desolate Sword essence was firstly because of the material of the Heaven Beheading Sword. It was tough and had a strong resistance. Secondly, it was because the Divine Desolate Sword essence was not strong enough. At the very least, at the low level of the Nirvana stage, Chu Mu did not need to worry about the Divine Desolate Sword essence causing damage to the Heaven Beheading Sword. Once the Heaven Beheading Sword was kept in his dantian and was tempered by the Divine Desolate Sword essence, its tolerance towards the Divine Desolate Sword essence would increase over time. Even if Chu Mu's cultivation increased in the future and reached the middle level of the Nirvana stage, it would probably not cause any damage to the Heaven Beheading Sword. Feeling completely at ease, Chu Mu heaved a sigh of relief. With a thought, the sword in his hand disappeared and returned to his dantian to be tempered. Then, Chu Mu took out the other treasures he had obtained from the 1,000 Treasure Hall. There was a top-grade sacred grade inner armor that could be worn close to the body and had a very good protective effect. There was also a top-grade sacred grade armor that Chu Mu liked. On it, there was a faint bright moon pattern that was faintly discernible. There was no need to refine the armor and inner armor. Chu Mu immediately put them on. Under the double protection, his survival ability had greatly increased. If it wasn't a top-grade sacred grade sword, it would not be able to threaten him. The Sky Slash sword increased his attack power by a lot. The extreme grade Saint grade armor and extreme grade Saint grade inner armor increased his defense and survivability by a lot. The 10,000 treasure palace was very large and contained many treasures of all kinds. However, there were only a few treasures that were suitable for him. After obtaining the Heavenly Slash sword, the top quality sacred rank armor, and the top quality sacred rank inner armor, which increased his attack and defense, Chu Mu's desire to continue searching for treasures faded. With a flip of his wrist, a black stone appeared. When he took a closer look, he saw that it was a crystal. The moment the black crystal appeared, a shocking baleful aura immediately spread out from the crystal. Wisps of dark red aura spread out from the black crystal and whimpered. A gust of chilly wind blew from an unknown place. The entire cultivation room became as gloomy as the underworld, causing Chu Mu to feel a chill run down his spine. As the chilly wind blew, there seemed to be a distorted face appearing. An even stranger voice that sounded like weeping and complaining, like ghosts and spirits, messing with one's mind. An extremely terrifying baleful aura spread out from the chilly wind like a surging wave. The entire cultivation room was filled with a baleful aura and chilly wind that was so dense that it could not be dispersed. If the sword of Gojoseon, who was in the manifestation realm, was in the middle of it, it would immediately corrode his mind, causing him to go crazy and his mind to collapse. After Nirvana, there was an obvious improvement in all aspects. In addition, Chu Mu's willpower was extremely firm, so he was not affected by the baleful aura. However, he still had to be careful. This was a piece of baleful aura crystal. The black color was actually the color formed after the accumulation of the blood-red color. Chu Mu could not determine how old this piece of baleful aura crystal was. It was at least 10,000 years old. Although there were many treasures in the 1,000 treasure hall, there were also many treasures that were not included. After all, although the main divine hall was powerful, it was not powerful enough to monopolize everything. Moreover, the main divine hall only existed to lead and not monopolize power. The Heaven Beheading Sword, the top-grade sacred grade armor, the top-grade sacred grade inner armor, and this piece of baleful aura crystal of unknown age had taken Chu Mu a lot of time. With such a harvest, he was satisfied. When his hand grabbed the baleful aura crystal, he immediately felt the baleful aura as if it had found a target. It surged into Chu Mu's body. Even his tyrannical body felt traces of coldness and piercing pain. In the spiritual world, a cold wind whistled. In front of him, there seemed to be countless illusions. It was as if he was in a river filled with a cold and decaying aura. Broken limbs and corpses floated in the water. It was like the river of the underworld. The undying sword will move. Its sharpness was unstoppable. It killed everything and no evil could invade it. All the illusions collapsed before his eyes. It was like ice and snow melting under the hot sun, vanishing into thin air. The cultivation room was still the same as before. The baleful aura crystal in Chu Mu's hand was extremely dense. It kept surging into his body, and was then absorbed by the undying sword in his middle dantian. This was an extremely high-quality baleful aura. It was a baleful aura that had been accumulated for tens of thousands of years. The undying sword's appetite was greatly stimulated. It kept absorbing it. With a tremble, it broke through from the peak of lower-grade sacred sword to middle-grade sacred sword. This baleful aura crystal was indeed very shocking. After absorbing it, the undying sword kept improving. Soon, it reached the peak of middle-grade sacred sword. With another breakthrough, it reached upper-grade sacred sword. The baleful aura crystal kept being consumed. It became smaller and smaller, but the quality of the undying sword kept improving. It reached the peak of upper-grade sacred sword. Half of the baleful aura crystal in his hand had been consumed. Chu Mu was secretly delighted. The remaining should be enough to upgrade the Undying Sword to extreme grade Sacred Sword. At that time, if he wanted to use the dual sword technique, he would have both the Sky Beheading Sword and the Undying Sword to use. He wouldn't have to worry about not having a suitable sword. Chu Mu still hoped that the Undying Sword could be upgraded to Sky Connecting Saint's Sword. Unfortunately, he had spent a lot of time and had only found one piece of such a high-quality baleful aura crystal. When the Undying Sword was upgraded to middle-grade Sacred Sword, it had used up all the baleful aura crystal. It couldn't be upgraded anymore. It was a bit of a pity. Then Chu Mu smiled. Extreme-grade Sacred Sword was enough. Next, Chu Mu naturally cultivated in seclusion for a period of time. He needed to cultivate the Divine Wilderness Sword technique and the second level of the Astral Calamity. Other than that, Chu Mu also felt that his offensive methods seemed to be lacking. Using his original sword technique as a Nirvana Realm cultivator would naturally be more powerful, but there was also a feeling that he couldn't fully unleash the power. It was like a person with divine strength using a light weapon. He couldn't fully unleash the advantage of his strength. He needed to have a higher level of sword technique or secret technique. Sword techniques were easy to solve. Chu Mu didn't have any, but he could go to the Hall of Sword Techniques in the main Divine Hall to find a suitable sword technique to cultivate. This was also one of the privileges of being a divine child. The other divine children had already cultivated heaven-level sword technique. Even if they broke through to the Nirvana realm, heaven-level sword techniques would be enough for them to cultivate for a period of time. Chu Mu emerged from seclusion. As soon as he emerged, Jiang Tao informed him that Feng Guohai had sent him an invitation to gather at the Hall of Entrance Island. Hall of Entrance Island. Chu Mu was slightly stunned as he held the invitation. Hall of Entrance Island was the floating island of the first divine child, Guan Lin. Could Guan Lin have emerged from seclusion? With a trace of curiosity, Chu Mu asked Jiang Tao to prepare a gift. After all, it was the first time they were meeting, and they were going to the other party's Divine Child Hall. It was necessary to give a small gift. The gift was prepared quickly. Chu Mu put the gift into his spatial ring and left the Zhentian Hall. He took a small starship and flew to the Hall of Entrance Island. Chu Mu was the last to arrive at the Hall of Entrance. 10th brother, you're finally here. Entering the Divine Child Hall, Feng Guohai saw Chu Mu and called out immediately. 10th brother, sit. The other divine children greeted him. You must be 10th brother, Chu Mu. Nice to meet you. I'm Guan Lin, the swordswoman who sat at the head of the table said to Chu Mu with a smile. I'm Chu Mu. Nice to meet you, eldest sister. This is a small gift. I hope you don't mind it, Chu Mu said with a smile. He took out the prepared gift and passed it to Guan Lin, taking the opportunity to study her carefully. Guan Lin's skin was slightly darker, but it was clean and delicate, giving off a healthy vibe. Chu Mu could see that she was tall and slender even as she sat. Guan Lin's appearance was different from ordinary people. There was an exotic beauty to her that made Chu Mu's mind wander, as if he had returned to Earth and seen a mixed-blood child. All in all, Guan Lin gave Chu Mu the impression of a wild and energetic swordswoman. She was also calm and composed with an extraordinary temperament. While Chu Mu was studying Guan Lin was doing the same to Chu Mu. The moment she came out of seclusion, she learned that there was a new divine child, the 10th divine child, who possessed high-level divine-level sword intent and the power of law. He had also mastered the powerful spatial law, and the origin chi cloud during Nirvana had reached 9 miles. In terms of talent and potential, he was above her. The more she learned about him, the more curious Guan Lin became. She sent out a post to gather the other divine children. After all, it had been quite some time since she had last communicated with the other divine children. Now that everyone had broken through to the Nirvana realm, they had more topics to talk about. Chapter 1200. The 10 divine princes had gathered in the Hidden Gate Palace. This was the first time they were all sitting together to talk about swordsmanship. Guan Lin had also asked people to prepare a lot of food and wine. They ate and drank as they talked. Guan Lin had a great tolerance for alcohol and was not shy like a little girl. She was very forthright, generous, and bold. She had the demeanor of a big sister. Among the 10 divine princes, the first divine prince, Guan Lin, was the first to achieve nirvana. Her aura was more profound and majestic than the other 9 divine princes. Her understanding of nirvana was also above the others. However, different people had different experiences when they achieved nirvana. Therefore, their understanding of nirvana would be more profound as they communicated with each other. Brainstorming was a win-win situation. In addition to exchanging their understanding of nirvana, some of them would also practice sword techniques from time to time. Sword techniques were not specific sword techniques or sword move. Instead, they demonstrated their understanding of sword techniques with the sword in their hand. The moves were not fixed and even looked a little casual. If a swordsman who was not proficient in sword techniques saw it, he would not be able to see anything at all. He would even think that it was a child's scribble without any order. However, in the eyes of a swordsman who was proficient in sword techniques, he could see the charm in it. It was a sword technique that went straight to the essence. Every divine prince had mastered the essence of sword techniques and sword energy. Their understanding of sword techniques was far beyond that of ordinary swordsmen. They practiced sword techniques one by one without any order. Guan Lin drank the wine in her cup in one gulp and stood up. This was the first time Chu Mu saw her stand up. Under the long robe was a pair of beautiful legs. Her figure was indeed very tall, and her height was not inferior to the other divine sons. Guan Lin's long robe was also very unique. It was a dark green robe for women. It perfectly set off Guan Lin's healthy and tall figure. She lifted her foot and a green shadow flashed. Guan Lin appeared in the center of the hidden gate palace. There was enough space to perform sword technique. With a wave of her slender hand, a sword that was stuck in the wall of the hidden gate palace suddenly flew out of its sheath and into her hand. As soon as the sword was in her hand, Guan Lin's aura suddenly changed. It was sharp and the smell of war spread out. Her black hair fluttered without wind. Her aura was piercingly cold and kept rising. The moment the sword slashed out, it was direct and direct. It was as if it could cleave a mountain, and even the heavens and earth were about to be sliced apart by this sword. They were majestic and straightforward, as if they were charging into the enemy's ranks. Chu Mu's eyes lit up. It was as if he saw an invincible divine army, unstoppable and unstoppable. They would crush all enemies and shatter all obstacles as they descended upon the world. All of a sudden, the divine princes felt as if they were on a yellow sand battlefield, with blood splashing everywhere. With the final slash of the sword, all of the accumulated momentum was completely unleashed. Blood and sand filled the air, and dust billowed. Everyone's hair stood on end, as if they were facing an army of thousands of men and horses alone. There was nothing special about Guan Lin's swordsmanship at all. It was straightforward, but it contained Guan Lin's understanding of swordsmanship and the essence of her way of the sword. Hundreds of battles in the yellow sand, tragic, indomitable, unstoppable, unstoppable. He sheathed his sword and stood there. All of the tragic aura vanished like smoke in thin air, as if it was just an illusion. With a gentle wave of her hand, the sword flew up and returned to its scabbard. A green shadow flickered, and Guan Lin returned to her seat. An army of thousands of men and horses. Such a powerful aura. Big Sister is indeed from a family of generals. Tuoba Zhan clapped his hands. Chu Mu only knew that Guan Lin was from a family of generals. That was why she had such boldness. All of the divine princes expressed their opinions. They were not flattering, but truly expressing their opinions and communicating with each other. 10th brother, it's your turn now. After expressing their opinions, they turned to Chu Mu. Among the 10 divine princes, There were still a few who had not shown their swordsmanship, and Chu Mu was one of them. Chu Mu smiled slightly. Without any pretense, he appeared in the center of the hall of entrances in a flash, and an upper-grade saint's sword appeared in his hand. There was no need to use sword will and sword origin to practice swordsmanship. An upper-grade saint's sword was enough. With the sword in his hand, his aura condensed. It was as if wind blew, clouds gathered, and lightning flashed. When the sword was drawn, it was as if it pierced through the void. When it was drawn, it was as if it was cutting through rivers. When it was cut, it was as if it was cutting through mountains. When it was pointed, it was as if it was shattering the stars. When it was pointed, it was as if it was a pillar to the sky. When it was drawn back and the sword was sheathed, everything in the world, including the sun, the moon, and the stars, all returned to one and then disappeared. Carefree and incisive. This was Chu Mu's complete display of his comprehension and control of sword techniques after undergoing nirvana. The same understanding and mastery, but the difference between before and after nirvana was completely different. When the sword was sheathed, Chu Mu did not move. He was in an epiphany. The other 9 divine princes were immersed in shock, unable to extricate themselves. It was silent in the hall of entrances. Even breathing could not be heard. After a while, Chu Mu woke up. His eyes were clearer, and his understanding of swordsmanship had improved. He felt that it would not be long before he could raise his swordsmanship from level 3 to level 4. The other divine princes also woke up. After seeing 10th brother's swordsmanship, I will never show my swordsmanship again. Lin Yiming sighed. His slightly exaggerated statement immediately resonated with the other divine princes, who nodded in support. Guan Lin looked at Chu Mu deeply. There was amazement in the depths of her eyes. I've long heard that 10th brother's talent is unparalleled. I didn't expect your swordsmanship to be so amazing as well, Guan Lin praised. Everyone's words were 70% sincere and 30% flattering. Chu Mu was not embarrassed. Indeed, among the swordsmanship that he had shown just now, he was the most profound. After seeing 10th brother's swordsmanship, I feel that there is no need for me to show it. Murong Qingfeng smiled bitterly, which caused a burst of laughter. However, Murong Qingfeng still got up. His body seemed to be carried by a gust of wind. He came to the center of the hall of entrances, stood still, and raised his hand to draw his sword. The green sword light flashed, leaving a trace in the air and slowly dissipating. Murong Qingfeng seemed to have a smile on his face. He drew his sword casually. Murong Qingfeng's figure moved along with the sword. It was as if his body had become weightless. He and the sword had become one. His will and the sword were there. The sword moved gracefully like a gentle breeze. It was a perfect demonstration of the mysteries of the wind. Murong Qingfeng was most proficient in the power of wind. His wind rule had already reached the minute subtlety level and had even reached the peak of the minute subtlety level. In this aspect, he was better than Chu Mu. His usage of the power of wind was also much better than Chu Mu. In terms of overall talent and potential, Chu Mu was better than Murong Qingfeng. He was also better than anyone present. However, Chu Mu was not omnipotent. In some aspects he could not be compared with others. Therefore, Chu Mu observed Murong Qingfeng's swordsmanship very seriously. He tried to absorb the essence of his swordsmanship and integrate it into his own swordsmanship to improve his own attainment. Murong Qingfeng's usage of the power of the wind was unique and profound. Chu Mu would not let it go. He observed it carefully, verified it, and improved himself. The essence of Murong Qingfeng's swordsmanship revolved around the power of the wind. It was light and sharp. Not long after, Murong Qingfeng finished demonstrating his swordsmanship. Everyone felt that they had learned something. After a round of discussion, the last person went up to demonstrate his own swordsmanship. Tuobajan's sword was different from ordinary swords. The blade was as wide as a palm. It looked very heavy. Ordinary swordsmen would not be able to wield it. The heavy sword was swung with great force. It was as if a mountain was pressing down, but also as if a sword could shatter a mountain. The air was stagnant, almost suffocating. Tuoba was also a dual cultivator, but he was different from Chu Mu. Tuoba was more focused on the path of body refinement, and on the path of qi refinement, he was only a support. Even so, his fighting strength was stronger than a single cultivator of the same level. It could be said that among the god's sons, excluding Guan Lin and Chu Mu, Tuoba was the strongest. The current Chu Mu might not be able to defeat him. After all, Tuoba had been a god's son for quite some time. Under such an environment, his accumulation of experience would surpass Chu Mu's. Tuoba swordsmanship was bold and open. It was similar to Guan Lin's. However, Guan Lin's swordsmanship was more like a battlefield tearing and killing. Tuoba swordsmanship was more domineering and crushing. Tuoba had his own unique way of using his own power. This was something that Chu Mu could not compare with. Chu Mu watched more attentively. He memorized every detail and tried his best to absorb it. Tuoba was the last to demonstrate his swordsmanship. It was very exciting. However, the crowd still felt that it was not enough. They had seen Chu Mu's swordsmanship. If I had known, I would have let 10th brother demonstrate his swordsmanship last. The god's son who had suggested Chu Mu to demonstrate his swordsmanship said regretfully. If it had been someone else who had said that, Tuoba, Murong Qingfeng and the rest would have been displeased. However, the god's sons had known each other for a long time. When they spoke to each other, other than not touching the bottom line, they were more casual. I suggest that 10th brother demonstrate his swordsmanship again. Tuoba roared. His loud voice immediately gained the support of the crowd. In response to the crowd's request, Chu Mu did not reject. He had learned something from watching the other gods' swordsmanship. After absorbing it, he also wanted to know if his own swordsmanship had improved. He unsheathed his sword and slashed out. Instantly, everyone's eyes lit up. They could not take their eyes off him. Chu Mu integrated everything he had learned into his own swordsmanship. After a while, the swordsmanship was finished. The crowd was still immersed in the excitement. I realized that 10th brother's swordsmanship seems to have improved again. This is too demonic. How are we going to live? 10th brother, hurry up and teach us the secret. How did you practice your swordsmanship? If they really wanted to teach him, they could not teach him anything. The comprehension of swordsmanship was purely dependent on one's comprehension. It was the kind of comprehension that could only be understood and not explained. 10th brother, you haven't learned any heaven-tier swordsmanship, right? Go to the Sword Arts Hall and pick a heaven-tier swordsmanship. By then, your strength would be comparable to Big Sister's. Chapter 1201. The exchange between the 10 divine princes lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. They talked about sword techniques, the power of rules, sword intent, cultivation, and other aspects. Finally, they also talked about some of their experiences. After 3 days and 3 nights, the discussion was very enjoyable and broadened their horizons. Everyone had gained a lot. It seems that we have to gather every once in a while and have a good exchange, Lin Yiming said. That's right. That's a good idea, 5th brother. Let's limit it to 10 years. We'll try our best to gather every 10 years, Guan Lin said. Given their talents, they should be able to grow quite a bit in 10 years. If they were to interact with one another again, it would surely be more meaningful. Of course, it didn't mean that they could only gather once every 10 years and couldn't gather at other times. It was just that once every 10 years, it would be best if everyone could be present and not be absent. It could also be considered a more formal gathering. Guan Lin's suggestion was naturally supported by everyone. Chu Mu didn't object at all. The gathering ended satisfactorily. After saying goodbye to Guan Lin, everyone left and went back to their own places to cultivate in seclusion and digest what they had gained. 1 day later, Chu Mu came out of seclusion and felt that his sword technique had improved. He left the Zhentian Palace and went to the Sword Techniques Palace in the General Divine Palace. The purpose of the Sword Techniques Palace was to collect sword technique. From the lowest level of yellow sword techniques to the highest level of heaven sword techniques, it had everything. It could be said that the Sword Techniques Palace of the General Divine Palace had collected at least 1/3 of the sword techniques in the 4 major star regions of the human race. This 1/3 was only 1/3 of what was known. There were some hidden ones, but there weren't many hidden ones. Overall, there wasn't much difference. Furthermore, the main Divine Palace had a huge and complete organization dedicated to the study of swordsmanship. The members of the organization were basically swordsmen with a unique understanding of swordsmanship. They all flipped through various types of swordsmanship, summed up their experiences, and combined it with their own understanding, and so on. They analyzed the swordsmanship in depth and created new swordsmanship. As time passed, the collection of swordsmanship in the Hall of Swordsmanship became more and more abundant. The saying that all the sword techniques in the world came from the Divine Palace was not arrogant. Although the name of the Hall of Sword Techniques was very ordinary, the 3 words on the door gave off a feeling of returning to simplicity. This hall was used to store sword techniques, so it was called the Hall of Sword Technique. Not only did it live up to its name, it had even reached a certain level. 10th Son of God, Your Highness. The deacon of the Hall of Sword Techniques immediately saluted Chu Mu when he arrived. I'll have to trouble you to open the door. Chu Mu returned the gesture and said. The door to the Hall of Sword Arts opened, and Chu Mu stepped into the Hall of Sword Arts. It was as if he had entered the first level of the Hall of Sword Arts. In the first level there were all kinds of auras: metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder, and so on. It was very complicated, but it was also very clear. This level recorded yellow class sword technique. Chu Mu did not stop and entered the second floor. The second floor contained the profound grade sword art. Chu Mu did not stop and entered the third floor. The third floor stored earth-level sword technique. Chu Mu walked up to the fourth floor. As soon as he entered the fourth level, he was immediately shocked. Although he did not observe the first to third levels of the Hall of Sword Techniques in detail, he could roughly tell what they were like. However, the fourth level was like a small world. A powerful aura spiraled and was incomparably sharp. He felt as if he was in a sea of sword chi and was being cut. The protective sword aura on his body was almost unable to withstand it. At first glance, there did not seem to be any treasures that contained sword technique. There was only a huge tree that stood in the sky as if it was a pillar that reached the sky. He also saw an azure dragon that swam in the sky of the small world. He also saw a fire phoenix dancing in the sky. Blue tides, mountains suppressing the earth, thunder and fire filling the sky, giant sharks wandering, hundreds of changes of fish and dragons, storms everywhere, and the 9 heavenly revolutions, strange phenomena, all kinds of strange phenomena were present in this small world. After careful observation, Chu Mu discovered that these strange phenomena were actually formed by various kinds of energy. They were not real life. For example, the azure dragon that was hovering in the sky was formed by the azure dragon sword chi and the 5 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth. Each strange phenomenon represented a heaven-level sword technique. Chu Mu needed to choose a suitable heaven-level sword technique based on the 10 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth that he had mastered. Although there were 10 kinds, there were actually 9 kinds. This was because the spatial rules of order rarely merged with the other kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth. It was not easy. Under normal circumstances, a heaven-level low-tier and mid-tier sword technique contained 5 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth, while a heaven-level high-tier and top-tier sword technique contained 6 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth. In terms of power, a heaven-level low-tier mid-tier sword technique was comparable to an ordinary unique skill. A heaven-level high-tier top-tier sword technique was comparable to an advanced unique skill or even a supreme unique skill. It was not easy to cultivate a heaven-level sword technique. Firstly, it was very profound. Secondly, it contained a lot of energy of the heavens and the earth. I should be able to find a suitable sword technique for me, Chumu thought to himself. He had already carefully sensed a few strange phenomena. Unfortunately, he had not mastered some of the energy of the heavens and the earth that they contained. Chumu could not deliberately comprehend the energy of the heavens and the earth for the sake of cultivating a heaven-level sword technique. That would be neglecting the essentials and focusing on the trifles. As he gradually went deeper, he slowly sensed and searched. When his spiritual sense was exhausted, he would recover and continue his search. After recovering his spiritual sense again, Chumu stopped in front of a mass of chaotic air. This mass of air looked a little strange. It was constantly fluctuating. Inside it, there were flashes of lightning from time to time. Sometimes there would be a whirlwind. After sensing it carefully, Chumu was delighted. This mass of air contained not only sword chi, but also 5 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth. They were the energy of wind, lightning, metal, fire, and earth. This is it, Chumu thought to himself. He sighed as if he had been searching for it 1,000 times. When he came into contact with this mass of air, waves of information flooded into Chumu's mind, accompanied by images. After half an hour, Chumu finished receiving the information. He had obtained a heaven-level sword technique. He felt dizzy and his head hurt slightly. He quickly turned and left. The ancient archaic sword technique was a heaven-level mid-tier sword technique. It contained the 5 kinds of energy of the heavens and the earth. Chumu was cultivating in the training room of the Zhentian Palace. He held the imperishable sword in his hand and practiced the moves of the ancient archaic sword technique. Sword after sword, his body moved with the sword. His aura was majestic and everlasting. The sound of the air being torn apart could be heard constantly. Rays of gray ancient archaic sword chi shot out from the imperishable sword, piercing through the void of the training room and leaving clear marks. Every sword had the aura of the ancient archaic path. Every sword was sharp and majestic. Every sword was peerlessly overbearing. The ancient archaic sword technique was ancient and profound. Without enough comprehension, it was impossible to achieve anything in this sword technique. Chumu didn't lack comprehension, so he could comprehend it. However, heaven-level sword techniques were too profound. It wasn't that easy to cultivate. He swung the sword again and again, forgetting about time and everything else. He was completely immersed in his cultivation. When he was tired, he would rest. When he rested, he would continue cultivating. Repeating this process, he became more and more familiar with the moves of the ancient archaic sword technique. The fierce and majestic ancient sword chi was boundlessly tyrannical. One after another, it bombarded the sword testing stone, causing cracks to appear on the sword testing stone that were 3 inches deep. He cultivated like a madman. Time flew by, and his grasp became more and more profound. The more he cultivated, the more Chumu could understand the essence of this sword technique. The ancient archaic sword technique focused on the power of wind and thunder. The other 3 kinds of energy were completely supplementary to the power of wind and thunder. In fact, most sword techniques were like this. It was impossible to focus on every kind of energy. Only by focusing on strong and weak energy could one bring out the power of the sword technique. On the human-shaped sword testing stone, countless sword scars were left behind by the ancient archaic sword technique's ancient archaic sword chi. Wind rise, thunder destroy. Chumu abruptly let out a low roar. His aura abruptly changed. A gale blew up, sending sand and rocks flying. Clouds flew, flames burned the heavens, golden light dazzled, and lightning flashed. Everything lost its color, as if it had lost all its power. Wind rise, thunder destroy. This was also one of the sword techniques of the ancient archaic sword technique. It was one of the two techniques that had a name. To put it simply, the ancient Azure sword art's sword moves were all conventional sword moves that consumed energy. As for the last two moves, they were not conventional sword moves. They were tyrannical sword moves that consumed a great deal of energy. Each of them had their own uses. Wind Rise, Thunder Destroy could be used to attack, but its main use wasn't offense. It was also used for defense. It was a sword technique that was both offensive and defensive. When comparing offense and defense, defense was more outstanding. Wind, thunder, and the other three types of energy could better weaken an enemy's attack. They could reduce the damage to oneself, and they could also pose a threat to the enemy. Using Wind Rise, Thunder Destroy over and over again consumed a great amount of sword origin each time. Chu Mu's current reserve of sword origin couldn't be used many times. Once it was used up, he would first cultivate the other sword techniques of the ancient archaic sword technique. Then, he would cultivate Wind Rise, Thunder Destroy. As for the last technique, Thunder Break Prison, he still didn't have the ability to cultivate it. Whether it was Wind Rise, Thunder Destroy, or Thunder Break Prison, they were all based on the other sword techniques of the ancient archaic sword technique. It could be said that the other sword techniques were the foundation. The more one cultivated, the more proficient they would become. Only after reaching a certain level could one cultivate Wind Rise, Thunder Destroy, or Thunder Break Prison. Time, for a sword artist with a higher cultivation, gradually became less important. A Nirvana realm sword artist could easily live for tens of thousands of years. A few years or decades were nothing. It was like a few days for an ordinary person. Within the sword practice room, the sword testing stone was riddled with holes. It was a tragic sight. Fortunately, it could automatically restore itself. It didn't take long for it to be restored to its original state. It didn't look like it had been abused. Chu Mu let out a low roar and raised his sword again. With a slash, the earth was set ablaze and the earth was scorched. Blood dyed the earth red. It was like purgatory. The lightning instantly converged. The sword and the lightning became one as it slashed down, shattering everything. Chu Mu's sword and the lightning became one as it slashed down, destroying everything. Thunder Break Prison. Chapter 1202. In the vast and deep starry sky, there were countless stars, emitting countless rays of light that decorated the universe. It was filled with endless mysteries. One after another, the starships sailed in the boundless starry sky without making a sound, like stones sinking into the sea. This starship was dedicated to carrying passengers. It belonged to a certain family, and Chu Mu was on it. After mastering the ancient archaic sword technique, Chu Mu left the main shrine and prepared to return to the Five Elements sword sect. It had been a few years since he left the Five Elements sword sect. He didn't know if the sect master of the Five Elements sword sect had come out of seclusion. If he did, he could give the five-colored jade to the sect master of the Five Elements sword sect. As the god's son, Chu Mu could use the starry sky gate of the main shrine at will and directly teleport to a heavenly sword palace in the demon sword star domain. Then, he could teleport to another galaxy from this heavenly sword palace and enter the night darkness galaxy. However, the distance to the Five Elements star was quite far. Chu Mu had to pay for the two teleportations, which consumed a lot of primary elixirs. He was very close to the Five Elements star, only one life planet away. In order to save some primary elixirs, Chu Mu decided to take the starship. To him, there was no difference whether he arrived in an instant or 10 days later. He wouldn't waste these 10 days. He could use them to cultivate, improve his cultivation, and improve his swordsmanship. Apart from cultivating, Chu Mu was also thinking about his own path. Since entering the ancient god world, he had walked step by step. His cultivation and strength had increased, but the road ahead was still long. The more he advanced, the more he knew how long the road was. The more he climbed, the more he knew how high the mountains were. This was a road that seemed to have no end. However, since he was going down this road, he had to be firm, step by step. He had to work hard and not be afraid of difficulties and obstacles. He had to be fearless and cut through all obstacles to reach the other side. His thoughts drifted away. All kinds of memories made Chu Mu's heart to pursue the Tao more determined. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days had passed. The starship also landed in the 5-direction star. It was not far from the mountain where the 5 Elements sword sect was located. It directly soared into the sky, turned into a sword light, and sped in the direction of the 5 Elements sword sect. As soon as he moved, it instantly caused a wave of exclamations of surprise because Chu Mu's speed was too swift, and it was even swifter than an ordinary rebirth realm swordsman. Not long after, Chu Mu arrived outside the mountain gate of the 5 Elements sword sect. He immediately took out his identity sword token. That was the identity sword token of an esoteric disciple. His status was quite high. "Senior brother, we are just following the rules of the sect. Please forgive us." The gatekeepers were only outer sect disciples. They quickly and respectfully returned the identity sword token to Chu Mu and bowed, as if they were afraid that Chu Mu would blame them. Indeed, such a thing had happened before. Some esoteric disciples had bad tempers. When they encountered such a situation, they might directly attack and injure others. "It's fine." Chu Mu put away the identity sword token. He did not blame them, nor did he encourage them. After Chu Mu entered the 5 Elements sword sect, the 2 outer sect disciples guarding the mountain gate side, "This esoteric senior brother's temper is really good. Yeah, if it was another esoteric senior brother, it would be good if he didn't scold us. It's better not to talk about this. If we are heard, the consequences will be bad." This esoteric senior brother's name is Chu Mu. Why do I feel like I've heard this name before? Chu Mu. Chu Mu. After one of the gatekeepers muttered a few times, his eyes suddenly lit up. I remember now. A few years ago, the 10th god's son in the Heavenly Sword Hall's announcement was Chu Mu. The other gatekeeper was shocked and immediately said, "It must be the same name. If it is really the same person, our sword sect will definitely publicize it." What he said was indeed reasonable. If the 5 Elements sword sect was really sure that Chu Mu was the 10th god's son, they would definitely publicize it. That was an excellent opportunity to make the 5 Elements sword sect famous. They could not miss it and gain both fame and fortune. However, the 5 Elements sword sect did not. Therefore, this Chu Mu was not that Chu Mu. Of course, they did not know that this Chu Mu was indeed that Chu Mu, the 10th god's son, Chu Mu. It was just that the 5 Elements sword sect did not know. After entering the 5 Elements sword sect, Chu Mu flew on his sword and went straight to his Zhentian mountain. A few years had passed, but Zhentian mountain had not changed much. "Greetings, Peak Master." When the other disciples of Jiang Bei and Zhentian mountain knew that Chu Mu had returned, they were overjoyed and quickly came to greet him. "You may rise. Jiang Bei, stay. The other junior brothers can go do their own things," Chu Mu said. Jiang Bei's cultivation was still at the first sky of the Nirvana realm. The further one progressed in cultivation, the harder it was to improve. For example, in the manifestation realm, even a genius would need 1 or 2 years to improve by one layer. After breaking through to the Nirvana realm, the improvement of one's cultivation base would be even slower. Compared to the manifestation realm, the improvement was several times slower. Jiang Bei's talent was relatively average. Being able to successfully reach the Nirvana realm was already due to a considerable amount of luck. It would be difficult for him to go further in the Nirvana realm. Perhaps he would not be able to cultivate to the mid-level Nirvana realm in his life, unless he encountered some opportunity. However, Jiang Bei was satisfied, even if he was trapped at the first sky of the Nirvana realm for the rest of his life. Jiang Bei naturally also noticed the changes in Chu Mu. His cultivation had reached the nirvana realm, and he was extremely shocked. A few years ago, Chu Mu's cultivation was only at the third or fourth sky of the creation realm. A few years' time was nothing for a creation realm swordsman. To be able to reach the seventh sky of the creation realm was already heaven-defying. Chu Mu, on the other hand, broke through to the nirvana realm in an instant, and his cultivation was not inferior to his. However, Jiang Bei knew that in terms of strength, he was not as good as Chu Mu. If they fought, he would definitely die. I really don't know how he cultivates, Jiang Bei thought to himself. Aside from being shocked, he also became happy. Strictly speaking, he was now Chu Mu's follower. The stronger Chu Mu was, the better it would be for him. After reporting to Chu Mu everything that had happened on Zhentian Peak in the past few years, he also explained the major events of the Five Elements Sword Sect. After Chu Mu heard everything, he did not say anything. Jiang Bei retreated, and Chu Mu did not rest. He quickly left Zhentian Peak and headed to the main peak of the Sword Sect to find one of the Vice Sect Masters, Bai Qiong. Bai Qiong was the man with white hair. Bai Qiong was the one who had asked him to join the Sword God Legion and become a new recruit. It was also because of this that Chu Mu received the Best Recruit Medal and became a member of the Sword Edge Judgment Army. This experience could be considered an unforgettable experience in his cultivation. As for becoming a god, Chu Mu felt that it had nothing to do with whether or not he could enter the Sword Edge Judgment Army. However, if he did not enter the Sword Edge Judgment Army and his strength increased, it was still unknown whether he could enter the trial realm. If he could not enter the trial realm, then there would naturally be no later events. Then whether he could become the 10th god's son was also unknown. In short, Chu Mu's current achievements were more or less related to Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong's decision back then. Therefore, Chu Mu felt grateful and respected him. This was also the reason why Chu Mu returned to Zhentian Peak after returning to the Five Elements Sword Sect and immediately rushed over. With Chu Mu's identity as a secret disciple, he had the qualifications to meet the Vice Sect Master. After a round of notification, news came that Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong had allowed Chu Mu to enter. When he saw Chu Mu, Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong's body shook. His eyes widened, but his pupils instantly contracted. An incomparably sharp light shot out from the center of his eyes, piercing through the void and tearing heaven and earth. An incomparably sharp aura erupted, like an invisible heavenly sword that split the heavens and earth. Chu Mu felt as if he was about to be torn into pieces. His chi and blood surged, and his mind shook. Fortunately, Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong reacted quickly and hurriedly restrained his aura. Otherwise, it might cause harm to Chu Mu. When Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong restrained his aura, Chu Mu secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although it was only a small part of a powerful sword saint's aura, it was still boundlessly tyrannical. It was far from what he, who was at the first sky of Nirvana realm, could resist. It seems that the decision back then was correct, Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong said with a faint smile. What he meant was that it was right to let Chu Mu join the army. Otherwise, Chu Mu's cultivation wouldn't have been able to rise so quickly. The trial realm opened. Did you enter it? Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong asked. Yes, Chu Mu said. There was no need to hide this. You should have obtained a ranking, right? Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong asked again. Yes, Chu Mu also directly answered without hesitation. You're the 10th god's son? Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong asked a third question. Chu Mu was silent. He wanted to answer no because he didn't want his identity to be known. There were advantages and disadvantages. However, if he answered no, it would go against his conscience. Silence, no answer. Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong understood his meaning and smiled slightly. There seemed to be a deep shock that was difficult to release in his eyes. In his life, he had experienced countless trials and tribulations. He had also been surprised many times, but never once had he been as shocked as today. The Five Elements Sword sect had actually produced a divine sun disciple. This was unprecedented glory. However, Vice sect leader White Sky suppressed this matter in his heart. If he announced it, the Five Elements Sword sect's reputation would definitely soar and overshadow the Dark Knight Sword sect. He would also gain both fame and fortune. However, it seemed that Chu Mu didn't intend to let others know his identity. Therefore, if he announced Chu Mu's identity, it might arouse his disgust. It wasn't a good thing to make a god's son dislike the Five Elements Sword sect. Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong suppressed this thought and skipped this question. However, the tone of Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong and Chu Mu changed slightly and became more equal. The god's son had a high status and didn't have any conflict with him. On the contrary, their relationship was quite good. Perhaps in the future they would need to rely on each other. After talking for a while, Chu Mu also asked if the Sword Sect Master was here. Chapter 1203. Gold, sharp and piercing. Green, full of vitality. Blue, gentle and continuous. Red, scorching and violent. Brown, steady and thick. 5 colors, 5 types of energy, 5 types of auras, and they constructed a small space. Chu Mu sat at one side of this 5-colored space, whereas another person sat before him, a person that he'd never met yet always wanted to meet. The sect master of the Five-Element Sword sect, Lin Wufang. This was a tall and robust person with a stocky back and a slightly boorish appearance. He looked to be the type of person that was extremely strong and respected strength. Frankly speaking, he was a boorish person. But if his enemy really thought so, then he would lose for sure. As his eyes opened and closed, a trace of light faintly blossomed, and this light was called wisdom. After controlling the Five-Element Sword sect for a few hundreds of years, if Lin Wufang was really a boorish person, then the Five-Element Sword sect would have been annihilated a long time ago. How could it possibly still occupy the entire Five-Element star and be one of the 10 Overlord-level sects of Nether Night Galaxy? Steady like a mountain that never moved since time immemorial. It was as if the small space was centered around the figure. Chu Mu looked at Lin Wufang, and Lin Wufang was sizing up Chu Mu as well. His seemingly calm gaze was extremely sharp, and it seemed as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu. "Is there something you need from me?" Lin Wufang asked. Chu Mu was a secret disciple and had some status in the Five-Element Sword sect, but it was still greatly inferior to the sect master. Even holy sons weren't able to meet the sect master at will, unless there was an especially important matter that the vice sect master was unable to decide or the sect master personally summoned the sect master. Chu Mu was able to meet Lin Wufang because of White Sky's recommendation. White Sky said that Chu Mu had something important and had to meet the sect master. Of course, White Sky didn't speak of Chu Mu's true identity. If White Sky said that Chu Mu was a godchild, then there was utterly no need for any reason, as Lin Wufang himself would pay a visit. Chu Mu didn't say anything. He directly took out the 5-colored jade from his interspatial ring. This 5-colored jade was originally stored in his small space, but Chu Mu didn't want anyone to know about its existence, so he had taken out the 5-colored jade and stored it in his space ring on the way here. Lin Wufang's eyes flashed with suspicion as he took the 5-colored jade. "Elder, he asked me to give this to you," Chu Mu said. Then, he briefly explained what had happened on the Evil Dragon Star. "Elder, he..." Lin Wufang held the 5-colored jade and became silent. After a while, he said, "Elder, he left for over 100 years. I didn't expect him to pass away just like that." His tone was filled with emotion. Immediately, Lin Wufang flicked his 10 fingers and shot out a 5-colored energy. It was the energy of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It condensed into a seal and fell on the 5-colored jade. The 5-colored jade emitted a 5-colored light, like a scorching sun. Then, it converged, and the five-colored jade emitted a strange aura fluctuation. Lin Wufang stared at the five-colored jade. Chu Mu noticed that his expression changed slightly. It changed back and forth between joy and sorrow. In the end, it settled on ecstasy. That ecstasy was like a flash in the pan. The jade you brought is very important. It's a great merit. Lin Wufang took a deep breath. After putting away the five-colored jade, he slowly said to Chu Mu, "Do you control the five elements?" Chu Mu nodded. "Release your power of the five elements," Lin Wufang said. Lin Wufang's words were very direct, but they weren't forceful at all. Instead, it felt like a spring breeze. Chu Mu didn't resist and released his five-element. Lin Wufang's eyes suddenly widened in shock. Rule of gold, refinement; rule of wood, refinement; rule of water, refinement; rule of fire, refinement; rule of earth, foundation. Out of the five elemental powers, 4 of them had reached the minute subtlety level. Lin Wufang's eyesight was outstanding. He could see that Chu Mu's bone age was less than 100 years old. A first sky of Nirvana realm less than 100 years old was a genius, but it wasn't enough to shock him. However, a first sky of Nirvana realm less than 100 years old had mastered the five elements and 4 of them had reached the refinement level. He couldn't help but be shocked. His deep eyes stared at Chu Mu. Lin Wufang looked at this esoteric disciple seriously. "Since the jade you brought back is very important, you will be rewarded for this great merit." Lin Wufang pondered for a while. "There are 3 options for you to choose from. First, I will promote you to the Holy Son. You will have the rights of a Holy Son and can compete for the position of deputy sect leader or even the position of sect leader." After saying the first option, Lin Wufang still stared at Chu Mu's eyes to see Chu Mu's reaction. However, he found that Chu Mu's expression didn't change. Even his eyes didn't have the slightest fluctuation. "Second, I will give you tens of millions of sect contribution points." Chu Mu's eyes flickered. Tens of millions of sect contribution points was quite a lot. It was enough for him to exchange for a lot of treasures. "Third, I will give you the 5 elements scripture to cultivate." "May I ask, sect leader, what is the 5 elements scripture?" Chu Mu asked. "The 5 Elemental Sutra is a secret technique of our 5 Elemental Sword sect. It's not a cultivation technique, nor is it a body-refining technique. It's a special technique that specializes in cultivating the power of the 5 elements and deepening one's grasp of the power of the 5 element." Lin Wufang looked deeply at Chu Mu and explained. "In the end," he added, "sect contribution points cannot be exchanged for it." Chu Mu was stunned when he heard this. He was originally wondering how many contribution points he would need to exchange for the 5 elements scripture. Lin Wufang's words made him understand that the 5 elements scripture was the true secret of the sect. It wasn't something that anyone could cultivate. Lin Wufang said the third option because the 5-colored jade Chu Mu brought back was very important. Secondly, it was because Chu Mu had mastered the 5 elements and 4 of them had reached the microscopic realm. In the 5 elements sword sect, it wasn't that there weren't people who had cultivated the 5 elements to the minute subtlety level. However, they were at least at the elder level. As for disciples, there were extremely few. There were some, but they were much older than Chu Mu. Chu Mu thought for a while and made a decision to choose the 5 elements scripture. He completely excluded the first option. The Holy Sun position was more than 1 level lower than the Holy Sun position. Chu Mu didn't care about the 5 elements sword sect's deputy sect master or sect master position. Secondly, tens of millions of sect contribution points might seem like a lot, but when one thought about how even the cheapest absolute art would cost 30 million sect contribution points, and the same for a heaven-class low-tier sword art, it meant that tens of millions of sect contribution points might sound like a lot, but it was actually not that much. As for the third option, Lin Wufang didn't introduce much about it. However, he said that it was a secret of the sect, and that it couldn't be exchanged for with contribution point. It was enough to show its value. Lin Wufang's eyes flashed with admiration for Chu Mu's wise choice. Immediately, a 5-colored jade appeared in his hand. It was different from the one Chu Mu gave him. Accept it here. Lin Wufang handed the 5-colored jade to Chu Mu. After Chu Mu received it, he touched it with his divine remembrance. Instantly, information gushed into his mind and colorful ripples appeared. After a while, Chu Mu finished accepting it. The 5-colored jade in his hand shattered. The 5 Elements Sutra's cultivation condition is that you must master the power of the 5 elements. You have met this condition and can cultivate it, Lin Wufang said. Thank you, Sect Master, Chu Mu said. If there's nothing else, that's all. Lin Wufang asked him to leave. Chu Mu stood up and saluted with his sword before leaving. Looking at Chu Mu's back, Lin Wufang fell into deep thought. After handing the 5-colored jade to Lin Wufang and completing Elder He's request, Chu Mu felt relieved. Otherwise, he would always be thinking about it. If this continued, it might cause some negative effects. Now that he had completed Elder He's request, it was as if a speck of dust had disappeared from his heart. Quickly returning to Zhentian Mountain, Chu Mu went straight to the cultivation room and started to comprehend the 5 Elements Sutra that he had just obtained. Some cultivation techniques were more special. These types of cultivation techniques had different uses, but they couldn't directly increase one's cultivation or strength. However, they were very important and very precious. The 5 Elements Sutra was one of them. It was one of the secret manuals of the 5 Elements Sword sect. It was a top-secret technique for cultivating the power of the 5 elements. Chu Mu gave the 5-colored jade to Lin Wufang so that Lin Wufang would value him. That was why he brought up the 5 Elements Sutra. After carefully comprehending it for half a day, Chu Mu finally finished reading the 5 Elements Sutra. He even comprehended some of it. He was very glad that he had made the choice because the 5 Elements Sutra was more useful than Lin Wufang had said. Chu Mu started to comprehend it again. He did his best to fully comprehend the 5 Elements Sutra before cultivating it. Only then would he be able to ensure that there wouldn't be any mistakes. The more profound the cultivation technique, the more attention one had to pay when cultivating it. Otherwise, if there were any mistakes, it would very likely affect oneself. For a few days, Chu Mu comprehended the 5 Elements Sutra over and over again. He constantly deepened his comprehension until his comprehension reached 10 points. Let's start cultivating. After adjusting his essence, chi and spirit to the peak, Chu Mu muttered to himself and began to cultivate the 5 Elements Sutra. Cultivating the 5 Elements Sutra was to drive the power of the 5 elements with the power of spiritual sense. It had nothing to do with sword origin or sword intent. The power of spiritual sense moved and immediately made a simple adjustment to the position of the power of laws in the spiritual world. 10 types of power of laws, 2 sword souls, and the heavenly desolation sword intent. Under the control of Chu Mu's spiritual sense, the power of laws of metal moved over. Then, it was the power of laws of water, wood, fire, and finally the power of laws of earth. The condition for cultivating the 5 Elements Sutra was to master the power of the 5 elements. If one didn't have the power of the 5 elements, even if they obtained the 5 Elements Sutra, it would be useless. Under the power of Chu Mu's divine sense, the 5 elemental energy was in place, forming a circle that seemed to be connected at the top. Then, Chu Mu began to cultivate according to the mantra of the 5 Elements Sutra. The first step was to stimulate the power of laws of metal. The power of spiritual sense vibrated in a strange way and fell on the power of laws of metal as if to stimulate the power contained in the power of laws of metal. The first time, he wasn't very familiar with it. It took him a full 10 breaths to successfully stimulate the power of laws of metal. Chapter 1204. In Chu Mu's spiritual world, the 5 elemental laws of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were connected, forming a circle. The 5 colors of gold, green, blue, red, and brown were shining brightly. The 5 types of energy were constantly flowing in the 5-colored circle like a river. The 5 elemental powers, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, reinforced and restrained each other. At this moment, Chu Mu's 5 elemental powers were circulating in a mutually reinforcing mode. After the law of metal was stimulated, it surged towards the law of water. After the law of water was stimulated, it surged towards the law of wood, the law of fire, the law of earth, and finally the law of metal, completing a complete cycle. After a cycle, the golden light shone brightly, and the power was much stronger than before. Metal birthed water, water birthed wood, wood birthed fire, fire birthed earth, earth birthed metal, and the 5 elements reinforced each other. The 5 elemental powers, other than the earth law, had all reached the minute subtlety level. Therefore, Chu Mu felt that the circulation of the elemental powers was a little sluggish. However, with the 5 elemental sutra, Chu Mu could quickly cultivate the earth law to the minute subtlety level. Chu Mu had been cultivating the divine wilderness sword essence, astral calamity cultivation technique, ancient firmament sword art, 5 elemental sutra, and so on. Unknowingly, half a month passed in a flash. The earth law was half a step into the minute subtlety. Just as Chu Mu was about to break through the earth law to the minute subtlety in one go, he was interrupted. "Junior brother, my name is Jiang Fan." After Chu Mu came out of seclusion, he saw a person sitting in the main hall of the Zhentian Hall. It was a young swordsman who looked to be in his 20s or 30s. This young swordsman was sitting very casually, as if he was at home. When he saw Chu Mu, he lazily opened his mouth and introduced himself. However, the second sentence caused Chu Mu to be stunned. "Senior brother, I've taken a fancy to this mountain. Please give it to me, junior brother," Jiang Fan said. He was not aggressive, nor did he sincerely plead. He just said it very casually, as if he was saying that the flower was very beautiful. "Junior brother Jiang, this is not a good joke," Chu Mu said indifferently. "Junior brother, I'm not joking. I've really taken a fancy to this mountain." Jiang Fan said with a slightly more serious expression, "If junior brother is unwilling to part with his treasure, senior brother will issue a challenge." In the sect rules, there was a rule that stated that if one won a challenge, one could obtain the ownership of the other party's mountain peak. If one lost, one would have to pay 10 million low-grade origin pills or 1 million mid-grade origin pills as compensation. Before Chu Mu became a disciple of the 5 Elements Sword sect, Jiang Fan had gone out to gain experience and had a fortuitous encounter. After his cultivation broke through to the second sky of Nirvana realm, he returned to the 5 Elements Sword sect and became an esoteric disciple. Esoteric disciples had a mountain peak to themselves. After some research, Jiang Fan had taken a fancy to Zhentian Mountain. Therefore, he had come here. After investigating Chu Mu and learning more about him, based on the fact that he had entered the sect earlier and had a higher cultivation base, he addressed Chu Mu as junior brother and called himself senior brother. "Then let's fight," Chu Mu said with a slight smile. Although his cultivation base was at the first sky of Nirvana realm, and Jiang Fan was at the second sky of Nirvana realm, Chu Mu was not afraid. In fact, he was eager to fight to test his strength. If he lost, he would just lose a mountain peak, which was not important to him. Most importantly, Chu Mu felt that he would not lose. "Junior brother, I have to remind you that the gap between the first sky of Nirvana realm and the second sky of Nirvana realm is greater." Jiang Fan's eyes lit up and he immediately said, "So what?" Chu Mu asked in reply. "Good, junior brother, you're brave." Jiang Fan laughed and flew out of the hall. Chu Mu followed closely behind. Both parties were high up in the sky above the heaven-shaking peak. They charged upwards and flew to an altitude of nearly 10,000 meters. "I'm afraid that once I attack, my power will be too strong and cause damage to this mountain peak. Then, the loss will outweigh the gain," Jiang Fan said with a very confident look, as if defeating Chu Mu was only a matter of time. I think so, too. Chu Mu said. The destructive power of the Nirvana realm was dozens of times greater than that of the Nirvana realm. He also did not want to cause damage to Zhentian Mountain. Jiang Bei and the others noticed the two figures in the air and looked up. Even the swordsmen of the Nirvana realm had amazing eyesight, and they could easily see things 10,000 meters away. That's the Peak Master. Who's the other one? What are the Peak Master and that person doing? Are they going to fight? As soon as the words came out, everyone became excited. 10,000 meters up in the sky, Chu Mu and Jiang Fan stood opposite each other with 100 meters between them. The wind blew past, causing their long robes to flutter and their black hair to dance. Jiang Fan reached out his right hand and clenched it. Light flickered as if ice and snow were falling. The temperature in the air suddenly dropped. In the falling snow, a sword that seemed to be made of ice appeared in his hand. He waved it gently, and the snowflakes danced in the air. Jiang Fan's aura suddenly changed from a lazy and casual look to a cool and serious one. It was as if a lazy spring had suddenly turned into a cold and gloomy winter. Jiang Fan's eyes also became cold. In an instant, the disciples on Zhentian Mountain felt their bodies tremble. Jiang Bei's face was even more serious. He felt that Jiang Fan's cultivation was higher than his. It was at the second sky of the Nirvana realm. Jiang Bei could not help but be a little worried about Chu Mu, because Chu Mu's cultivation was only at the first sky of the Nirvana realm. But the current situation was not something he could interfere with. The imperishable sword appeared in Chu Mu's hand. Wisps of imperishable aura circled around him. It was so cold that no one could get close to him. Jiang Fan waved his sword and rushed toward Chu Mu like a sword. Suddenly, the sword chi of ice and snow shot out, and the snowflakes became heavier. It was as if a snowstorm had fallen from the sky. Snow fell down like goose feathers, turning the sky 10,000 meters into a sea of ice and snow. Low-tier Heaven Realm Sword Art, Icy Snow Sword Art. The ice and snow formed by the sword chi attacked like a raging storm. Chu Mu smiled and slashed out with the imperishable sword. Suddenly, wisps of ancient aura spread out. The ancient sword art. Ever since he had obtained the ancient sword art, he had never fought with it. This was the first time. An opponent at the second sky of the Nirvana realm who was using a low-tier Heaven Realm sword art might be a good opponent. The ancient sword art was performed. The ancient sword chi shot out and shattered the ice and snow. The terrifying aura made Jiang Fan's face change. The swift and fierce sword technique and the vast and ancient aura were almost suffocating. The disciples of the heaven-shaking peak were all shocked, and Jiang Bei's expression changed drastically. The ice and snow sword chi and the ancient azure sword chi collided again and again. Sparks flew as the two swords clashed again and again. Terrifying explosions rang out as if they were shattering the heavens. They traveled 10,000 meters and shook the surroundings, causing the disciples of the heaven-shaking peak to almost lose their hearing. It also caused the disciples of the other peaks to be alarmed as they all looked over. In less than 10 breaths, the two sides had fought hundreds of times. Jiang Fan found that he couldn't defeat Chu Mu at all. He even seemed to be suppressed. The two swords collided. Under the explosion of power, the air was shattered, and the ice and snow were turned into powder. Jiang Fan borrowed the force and quickly retreated. He raised his sword, and an extremely cold aura suddenly burst out from his body and rushed toward his sword. "Take my move, ice and snow." Jiang Fan's voice was as cold as ice and snow. The sword slashed down and a terrifying ice appeared. It shattered and turned into countless snowflakes. Immediately after, the snowflakes gathered again and formed a terrifying ice sword. It slashed down heavily. The heaven and earth were about to be frozen and shattered. The disciples of the sky-shaking peak below all shivered and felt extremely cold. "Let's try the wind and thunder," Chu Mu secretly said. His power burst out and he slashed out with his sword. A strong wind blew, causing the huge sword of ice to pause for a moment. The ice on the sword was scraped up piece by piece, and then it seemed to be made of metal. It was incomparably sharp, and as it spun, it seemed to cut through space. Countless sparks flew out, and when they fell, they burned and scorched the land for thousands of kilometers. Suddenly, a lightning glow appeared and spread out, wrapping around the huge ice sword. The powerful strength caused the huge ice sword to shatter and break, turning into countless ice fragments. Jiang Fan was taken aback. He couldn't believe that his attack would be shattered so easily. His expression changed drastically. His pupils turned into snowflakes as if they were suffused with ice. He slashed out again, and a voice colder than ice came out from his mouth. Thousands of miles of snow. Snow fell from the sky, covering thousands of miles. Not only Zhentian Mountain, but also the surrounding mountains, trees, leaves, and the surface of stones were covered with a layer of frost. It gradually spread. The swordsmen who hadn't reached the Nirvana realm felt cold all over, as if they were suddenly in the middle of winter. They couldn't help but shiver, and hurriedly operated the sword origin to drive away the invading coldness. Palm-sized snowflakes danced in the air. The edges of the snowflakes condensed into ice, as sharp as the edge of a sword. The sword swung forward and countless ice snowflakes flew towards Chu Mu like locusts. The snowflakes sliced apart the heaven and earth as they flew. Together with the ice shattered by the wind and lightning, the snowflakes were like a storm, demanding for lives. The power of the ultimate move of the Heaven Realm sword art was displayed vividly. Chu Mu's eyes suddenly lit up. He raised his eyebrows and raised the imperishable sword. The imperishable sword intent poured in, and 5 kinds of forces of heaven and earth emerged. He slashed down. Thunder prison break. The scorched earth spread for thousands of miles, and the storm raged. It was like hell, and countless snowflakes were sucked in. The lightning that hadn't dissipated gathered again, and turned into the most terrifying thunder of all. The dark purple thunder fell from the sky as if it was old. On Zhentian Mountain, the hearts of the disciples jumped, and they almost suffocated. The terrifying aura of destruction made them feel like they were about to die. Thunder Prison Break, a pure offensive sword move, showed its power for the first time. The terrifying dark purple thunder shattered everything. Hell, thousands of miles of snowflakes, everything was turned into nothingness. Under the aftermath, Jiang Fan was sent flying for thousands of meters. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was slightly injured. That sword move was too powerful. After staring at Chu Mu for a while, Jiang Fan's cold aura faded, and he became lazy and casual again. "Senior brother Chu, you won," Jiang Fan said. He wasn't as strong as Chu Mu, so he changed the way he addressed him. Chapter 1205. For Chu Mu, a low-grade elemental elixir could no longer have any effect on cultivation, and even the recovery effect was minimal. A mid-grade elemental elixir was barely enough. At his current stage, with the transformation of his Dantian, the quality of his sword energy was far superior to that of the first sky of Nirvana realm. Only an upper-grade elemental elixir could meet the cultivation requirement. If he had a top-grade elemental elixir, the effect would be even better. Therefore, Chu Mu was not happy at all when he received the 10 million low-grade elemental elixirs from Jiang Fan. What really made him happy was the actual power of the ancient archaic sword technique, which was very powerful. In the battle with Jiang Fan, Chu Mu did not use his full strength. His sword intent and power of rules were all limited to the top of the heaven realm, which was the same as Jiang Fan's. He did not use his sword energy, nor did he use his powerful body refining cultivation. He only used his own cultivation to perform the ancient archaic sword technique. In terms of cultivation, Chu Mu was at the first sky of Nirvana realm, while Jiang Fan was at the second sky of Nirvana realm. However, because of the sword techniques that they cultivated, Chu Mu's divine wilderness sword energy was not inferior to Jiang Fan's in terms of quality. It could be said that Chu Mu's divine wilderness sword energy was not inferior to the second sky of Nirvana realm in terms of quantity. The ancient archaic sword technique was at the middle of the heaven realm, while the ice and snow sword technique was at the lower of the heaven realm. The difference between the two was obvious. Chu Mu's 4 types of power of rules, metal, fire, wind, and lightning, had reached the microscopic realm. Therefore, it was normal for him to defeat Jiang Fan. Chu Mu thought it was normal, but the others did not think so. The difference between each level of the Nirvana realm was even greater than the difference between the 2 levels of the creation realm. It was another shock for a first sky of Nirvana realm to defeat a second sky of Nirvana realm. As the disciples of the Zhen Tian Peak, they were all very proud. Jiang Bei was once again happy for his choice. After defeating Jiang Fan left. Chu Mu returned to the cultivation room of the Zhentian Hall and started cultivating again. 3 days later, Chu Mu's law of earth had successfully reached the microscopic level. At this point, Chu Mu had gained another microscopic level power of heaven and earth. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, the 5 elements were all at the level of minute subtlety and had reached a balance. As soon as Zhang Xian cultivated the 5 Elements Sutra, he immediately felt that it was different from before. The 5 Elements Sutra had reached a balance, and its effects were stronger. The circulation of energy was smoother. Due to the 5 Elemental Scripture, some changes had occurred in Chu Mu's mental world. Cultivating the 5 Elemental Scripture, the power of the 5 elements circulated. Unceasingly cultivating the power of the 5 elements also indirectly caused the mental world to become more stable and perfect. His law of earth had successfully broken through to the minute subtlety realm. Thus, Chu Mu temporarily exited seclusion. There were many visitors. They either came to make friends with him, or to rope in Chu Mu on behalf of the Sword Sect's holy sons. A first sky of Nirvana realm swordsman who had defeated a second sky of Nirvana realm swordsman was already qualified for them to pay a price to rope him in. "Thank you for your kindness, but I'm used to it," Chu Mu said, rejecting all of them. What kind of joke was this? Making him, the 10th divine son of the human race, serve a holy son of a sect? Wasn't he afraid of dying young? Being rejected by Chu Mu, some people didn't say much, but there were also people who snorted coldly, as if they were dissatisfied with Chu Mu's rejection. They left a threat of, "Take care of yourself," waving their hands and leaving. Jiang Bei was very worried because Chu Mu's actions had undoubtedly offended those people, which was equivalent to offending the group of people behind them and even the holy sons. In the future, it would probably be difficult for him to move an inch in the 5 Elemental Sword sect. However, Chu Mu didn't care at all because he didn't care at all. Whether it was status or potential, a holy son and a divine son weren't on the same level. It was like comparing the sect master of the sword sect and the temple master of the main divine hall. Originally, some people wanted to make things difficult for Chu Mu and let him know the consequences. However, after a piece of news came out, everyone's attention was diverted. The Tianqing list had been reactivated. The Heavenly Youth list is a fortune treasure of the human race during the Age of the Gods. After the gods fell and the center of the world shattered, it disappeared. Only now was it discovered in a secret realm and reappeared. The Heavenly Youth list records the geniuses under 100 years old. Being listed on the Heavenly Youth list not only represents glory, but also strength and potential. It also represents great fortune. When the news of the Heavenly Youth list's reappearance came out, it shook the 4 major galaxies of the human race. The complete name of the Heavenly Youth list was the Heavenly Youth list. 4 swordsmen, those under 100 years old, were considered youth. During the Age of the Gods, the human race's geniuses all took pride in being listed on the Heavenly Youth list. The original Heavenly Youth list was carried out by a special organization called the Heavenly Youth Palace, which belonged to the Heavenly Sword Hall. However, the Heavenly Youth Palace disappeared with the end of the Age of the God. Now, although the Heavenly Youth Palace could be reorganized, it would require time and talent. It wasn't that easy. Therefore, there was news that in order to reopen the Heavenly Youth List and reignite the human race's fortune, the Heavenly Sword Hall was preparing to make a big move. They would mobilize the 4 major galaxies of the human race to gather all the geniuses under 100 years old for a grand competition. They would fight with their strength and fight endlessly until the end. The Heavenly Youth List would only list 100 names in the end. To be able to be listed on it meant that one had great fortune. The higher the ranking, the greater the fortune. When the geniuses had a sufficient understanding of the Heaven Youth Leaderboard, each and every one of them was agitated and excited. Countless topics revolved around the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. No matter where they went, the topics they heard would definitely be related to the Heaven Youth Leaderboard. Haha, I will definitely be listed on the Heavenly Youth List. Many swordsmen were very confident in their own strength. All of them set the Heavenly Youth List as their goal. In the 4 major galaxies of the human race, there were hundreds of galaxies. Every galaxy had a Dominator-class force and at least 8 or 13 Overlord-class forces. There were also countless low-grade, mid-grade, and low-grade forces. Every force had a swordsman genius. In short, in the 4 major galaxies of the human race, there were countless swordsman genius below 100 years old. Every single one of them had the intention to compete and be listed on the Heavenly Youth List. This was a grand gathering that involved the entire human race. As a result, the various armies of the Heavenly Sword Hall were all mobilized and spread out outside the 4 major galaxies of the human race. The Dominator-class forces and Overlord-class forces also responded to the call of the Heavenly Sword Hall. They mobilized a portion of their sword experts to cooperate with the Heavenly Sword Hall's army and sealed off the 4 major galaxies of the human race. It could be said that the appearance of the Heavenly Youth List had caused the Heavenly Sword Hall to issue the highest alert. This was because the Heavenly Youth List was related to the revival of the human race's providence. The human race knew about it, and the foreign race also knew about it. The foreign race didn't want the human race's providence to rise. If the providence rose, the human race's overall strength would increase bit by bit. No matter how much the news of the reappearance of the Heavenly Youth List was sealed, it couldn't be completely sealed. It would leak out eventually. When that time came, the foreign race would probably sneak into the 4 major galaxies of the human race to cause trouble and prevent the Heavenly Youth List from being ranked. Or perhaps, the foreign race might send an army to attack directly. The Heavenly Sword Hall used the highest alert and mobilized the various armies of the Heavenly Sword Hall. The powerful forces mobilized and cooperated with each other to completely seal off the 4 major galaxies. There were 2 reasons for this. First, to delay the news of the Heavenly Youth List as much as possible. It would be best to delay it until the end of the Heavenly Youth List ranking battle. Even if the foreign race knew about it, it was already a foregone conclusion. Second, to prevent the news of the Heavenly Youth List ranking battle from being known by the foreign race in advance. The foreign race would then send experts to sneak into the 4 major galaxies of the human race to cause trouble and assassinate them or prevent the foreign race from sending an army to suppress them. In an instant, the 4 major galaxies of the human race were in a state of panic and everyone was treated as an enemy. Heavenly Youth List. Very good. Let the disciples of the sect who are less than 100 years old register themselves, Lin Wufang said. Very soon, the news spread. The registration for the Heavenly Youth List had begun. Heavenly Youth List. I won't miss such a grand event, Chu Mu muttered to himself. Without a doubt, he registered right away. If the Heavenly Youth List didn't have an age limit, Chu Mu wouldn't have any hope of being ranked on the Heavenly Youth List. However, the age limit was less than 100 years old. This gave him a glimmer of hope. To be able to reach the Nirvana realm before the age of 100 years old one would be considered a genius among geniuses. Every level of the Nirvana realm required a lot of time. Even for those super geniuses, it would take at least a few years. Hence, to reach the second sky of Nirvana realm before the age of 100 years old was even rarer. To reach the third sky of Nirvana realm before the age of 100 years old was even rarer. As for reaching the fourth sky of Nirvana realm before the age of 100 years old, it was hard to imagine. There might be some, but it was definitely extremely rare. As for Chumu, although his cultivation was only at the first sky of Nirvana realm, the power of his sword origin wasn't inferior to that of a second sky of Nirvana realm. In addition to his other techniques, he could definitely compete with a third sky of Nirvana realm. Even a powerful third sky of Nirvana realm swordsman might not be able to defeat Chumu. This was the source of his confidence. True geniuses all had their own confidence. After the registration, the Heavenly Youth List ranking battle hadn't started yet. Chumu seized the time to go into seclusion and try his best to improve his abilities in all aspects. No matter which aspect he improved, it would affect his abilities and bring about an improvement. Like Chumu, the geniuses who had registered either went into seclusion to cultivate or entered the secret territory to fight to the death. In short, they used the most useful method to improve their abilities as much as possible in preparation for the Heavenly Youth List ranking battle that was about to begin. Far away in the center of the four major star areas, on the floating island around the main shrine, the divine princes gathered. "I have already registered for the Heavenly Youth List," Lin Yiming said. "I will definitely be on the Heavenly Youth List. I feel that it won't be difficult for us to get on the Heavenly Youth List. The problem is whether we can get into the top 10, Song Lei said. They were divine princes and their ambitions were higher than the sky. They were 100% confident that they could get on the Heavenly Youth List, but they didn't want to be ranked too low. That's right. Even if we can't get first place, we have to at least get into the top 10. Tuobajan's eyes were blazing with battle intent. Don't be careless. Although we are divine princes, the descendants of some great emperors aren't inferior to us. Some of the secret techniques of the dominators are also enough to compete with us, Morong Qingfeng said. The divine princes were indeed ambitious, but it didn't mean that they were invincible. There were many geniuses in this world. Chapter 1206. The registration for the Heavenly Youth List lasted for 10 days before it ended. After another 5 days, the Heavenly Youth List battle finally began. The 4 major galaxies of the human race were vast and there were more than 100 galaxies. There were many geniuses who met the requirements for the Heavenly Youth List. It was hard to imagine that so many geniuses would be gathered to compete for the top 100 names. Countless geniuses competing for the top 100 names. It was difficult to imagine how intense it would be. According to the statistics, there were more than 200 disciples from the 5 Elements Sword sect who met the requirement. Every one of them was in the Nirvana realm and was less than 100 years old. The biggest requirement for the Heavenly Youth List battle was the age limit. There was no restriction on cultivation base. However, it was expected that the Heavenly Youth List would be ranked in the Nirvana realm. Without reaching the Nirvana realm, one wouldn't understand the power of the Nirvana realm. Even Chumu, who had displayed top divine grade sword intent and grade 3 sword force when he was at the peak of the 9th heavenly layer of Fortune realm, and even executed Deshang's burning blood transformation to increase his strength by burning his blood essence. At most, he could only contend with the most ordinary first heavenly layer of Nirvana realm swordsmen. This was the difference, the absolute difference. The difference in life and strength. Therefore, even if non-Nirvana realm swordsmen participated, they would only be supported by others. Rather than humiliating themselves and leaving a shadow in their heart, it was better not to participate and cultivate obediently. Not participating this time didn't mean that they wouldn't have a chance to be ranked on the Heavenly Youth List. After the Heavenly Youth Palace was completed, the Heavenly Youth List wouldn't be ranked through this method. At that time, anyone who was less than 100 years old would have a chance to be ranked on the Heavenly Youth list. At this moment, a huge azure light that seemed to be able to cover the entire world trembled and fluttered in the wind with the central divine hall as the center. Several thousand saints of the central divine hall all released their powerful sword origin, which poured into the azure light as streaks of light. Immediately, the azure light became brighter and brighter, expanding greatly. Ancient chanting sounds came from the azure light. Vaguely, there seemed to be 100 ancient figures sitting cross-legged in the azure light, chanting the human race's praises. The chanting sounds gradually drifted away, passing by the thousands of Saint Realm swordsmen and covering their bodies with a faint layer of azure light. As the chanting continued, the azure light became brighter and brighter, as if it was a blazing azure sun. The azure light expanded to tens of thousands of meters and enveloped the thousands of Saint Realm swordsmen. The chanting sounds of the 100 figures in the center of the azure light became louder and louder and louder, resounding through the heavens and earth. This continued for over half a month. At this point, the cyan light had reached its peak. The chanting was also extremely powerful. When the last character of the chanting burst out, the green ball of light expanded and contracted rapidly. It expanded again, and then it exploded without end. The Nirvana Youth List. Nirvana Youth Nirvana Realm Swordsman of Nirvana Youth Realm Swordsman to the Youth List Youth List. To the Heavenly Youth Nirvana Heavenly Sect. Heavenly Sect. Afterwards, every Sword Sect genius with the Heavenly Youth token entered the secret realm of the Sword Sect and were protected. Nirvana Realm experts were the main target. There was a reason for this. Chu Mu sat cross-legged in the secret realm of the 5 Elemental Sword Sect. Powerful 5 elemental seals surrounded him, protecting him very well. Even Saint Realm experts could forget about breaking through the 5 elemental seals and injuring him in a short amount of time. Chu Mu closed his eyes as he held the Heavenly Youth token. His breathing became even as he began to regulate his breathing, causing his essence, vitality, and spirit to gradually rise to the peak. After a while, Chu Mu felt a strange ripple of energy pass by his body. The Heavenly Youth token in his hand immediately trembled and released a ring of azure light. The light instantly expanded and merged with the strange ripple of energy, enveloping Chu Mu's body like an azure eggshell. This azure eggshell had an astonishing defensive power. Even a full-powered attack from a low-level sword saint couldn't do anything to it. The outermost layer was guarded by the experts of the 5 Elemental Sword Sect. Further in was the 5 Elemental Secret Realm, followed by the 5 Elemental Seals, and finally, the Azure Eggshell's protection. It could be said that even a high-level Saint Realm expert couldn't threaten Chu Mu and the others. As the strange ripple of energy passed by and covered the Azure Eggshell, Chu Mu only felt his consciousness sink into darkness as if he was about to fall into a deep sleep. After an unknown amount of time, Chu Mu woke up and opened his eyes. It was as if he had just woken up after sleeping for a long time. When he opened his eyes, a trace of confusion flashed through his clear eyes. Where is this? Chu Mu only felt that his head was a little swollen. He rubbed his temples as if there were many things that he couldn't remember. His body moved and he got up from the wooden bed. He felt that he should be able to relax even more. He closed his eyes again and tried hard to recall and straighten out his thoughts. There seemed to be a flash of inspiration. My name is Chu Mu. I'm an esoteric disciple of the 5 Elemental Sword Sect and also the 10th son of God of Sword Hall. I participated in the Heaven Azure List ranking battle. This is the Heaven Azure Void World. After trying hard to recall, Chu Mu remembered these things. He patted his head lightly and felt that he seemed to have forgotten some things. He got off the bed and looked down at himself. He was wearing a coarse hemp robe and couldn't help but be stunned. This didn't seem to be what he was wearing, right? Where was the supreme grade saint armor? Chu Mu didn't dwell on why he was wearing a coarse hemp robe. He raised his head and looked around, sizing up the environment. This was a very simple wooden house. There was a wooden bed for resting, a wooden table next to the head of the bed, and a wooden chair in front of the table. On the wall opposite the bed, there was an ordinary-looking sword. In addition, there was a bathroom. When he saw the sword, Chu Mu's pupils trembled and inexplicably emitted a ray of light that was restrained. He took a step forward, stretched out his hand, and took the ordinary-looking sheathed sword from the wall. When the sword was in his hand, a familiar feeling arose spontaneously. It was as if his hand was originally supposed to hold a sword. It was as if he was born to practice the sword and was born for the sword. The scabbard was made of fish-scale leather and the hilt was black and polished. Chu Mu's right hand held the hilt and only felt a slight friction between his palm and the hilt. It wasn't easy for his hand to slip. He slowly pulled out the sword. The slight friction between the sword and the scabbard sounded. That sound was a little noisy and a little obscure. Chu Mu muttered to himself, "This sword is 3 feet and 2 inches long, 1 inch and 1 inch wide, and 0.25 inches thick. It weighs 6 pounds and 8 ounces. The forging method is ordinary and the quality of the sword is very ordinary." When he held the sword in his hand, not only did he have a very familiar feeling, but he could also see the various advantages and disadvantages of this sword with a glance. This was a black iron sword, a very ordinary black iron sword. But no matter how ordinary or simple it was still a sword that could kill. The sword was already out of the scabbard. The sword's body was gray and a little dim. Chu Mu stared at the sword for a while, and the familiar feeling became stronger and stronger. There was no move, just a casual wave of his hand. A slight sound of wind breaking could be heard, and the sword light flashed as the sword slashed out. "Why do I feel that I have mastered many sword techniques?" Chu Mu thought to himself. But no matter how he thought, he couldn't remember what sword technique he had learned. In his inner vision, his spiritual world was very small. It was dark, empty, and cold. The meridians in his body were blocked, and his dantian was also empty. There was not a trace of power. He raised his hand, raised his foot, and punched out. The power was relatively ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. This was completely the body of an ordinary person. No, it was a body that was slightly stronger than an ordinary person's body. But compared to his original body, the difference was too big. It was like comparing a firefly to the bright moon. Suddenly, a piece of information emerged from the depths of his mind. 3 years. I only have 3 years. The information that emerged from the depths of his mind was like a strong alarm, constantly reminding Chu Mu and deepening his impression. He only had 3 years. He had to use these 3 years to cultivate as much as possible, improve all his abilities, and increase his strength. As for what would happen after 3 years, he didn't know. 3 years. This was like a curse, as if something bad would happen if he didn't achieve a certain goal after 3 years. The urging of 3 years was like a curse. Chu Mu's heart beat faster, and his blood flowed faster. Even his breathing became hurried. He tried hard to regulate his breathing and control it. Even though he had forgotten a lot, it was an instinct that was integrated into his soul. As long as his soul was still there, he wouldn't forget. As he consciously regulated his breathing, his heartbeat and blood flow returned to normal. His breathing also calmed down. Although the urging of 3 years had calmed down, Chu Mu didn't dare to underestimate it or relax. He sheathed his sword and held it in his left hand. He turned around and strode to the door of the wooden house. He pushed the door open and a bright light shone out. "I've long heard that the Tianqing list is mysterious, but I didn't expect it to be so mysterious. It can build a virtual world that covers the 4 major galaxies." In the main shrine, an elder exclaimed. They could see the structure of the Tianqing virtual world. "It's indeed mysterious. It allows the participants to enter as their souls and reconstruct the bodies of ordinary people for them. It temporarily seals their memories about cultivation, so they only know their names and identities. It also sets a time limit of 3 years for them to work hard to improve their abilities and strength in all aspects. Through this, it can see their talent, potential, and everything else. Although the memories related to the cultivation method and sword art have been temporarily sealed, the other memories are still there. Being strong for a while didn't mean that one would be strong forever. The ranking on the Tianqing list wasn't based on one's strength for a while, but on one's talent and potential for eternity. It included many aspects. Therefore, every participant had to start from scratch after entering the Tianqing virtual world. Within 3 years, they had to rely on their memories, talent, and potential to do their best to improve. Chapter 1207. There was a huge sun in the sky. It was burning fiercely and emitted thousands of rays of white light. It was like a heavenly sword descending and shooting on the ground, making people feel hot. Looking up, Chu Mu squinted his eyes. He felt that it was dazzling and hurriedly covered his eyes with his hands. Now, he was just an ordinary person. His eyes were weak and couldn't look directly at the light of the sun. Behind Chu Mu was a small wooden hut. Looking further, there was a row of small wooden huts. The small wooden huts' doors opened one after another, and figures walked out one after another. None of them knew each other. They looked at each other and didn't say anything. Their souls had entered the azure sky, ethereal world. Their memories of cultivation methods and sword skills were temporarily sealed. However, their other memories were still there. Therefore, their personalities and temperaments weren't affected. The arrogant ones were still arrogant, the cold ones were still cold, and the indifferent ones were still indifferent. But now everyone, no matter male or female, was wearing coarse linen clothes. They were either carrying a black iron sword. There wasn't the slightest ripple of sword chi on their bodies. Even so, their eyes were still very sharp, and they were flickering with light. Every one of them was a genius swordsman. They were super geniuses who had reached the Nirvana realm before the age of 100. Every one of them had great attainments in sword skills. Although they didn't have cultivation, sword intent, or the power of heaven and earth, and had forgotten cultivation methods, they were all swordsmen in essence. They all had the sharpness that belonged to swordsmen. Soon, the people who walked out of the wooden huts started to move. Chu Mu was among them. Chu Mu's memory was outstanding. He wasn't affected at all. With a glance, he could remember every position and face and quickly identify them. This place is called Night Underworld Tribe. Night Underworld is a bit familiar. After a while, Chu Mu had a good understanding of the place he was in. The Dark Night Tribe is huge. There are about 30,000 people like me. Besides, there are a few people who are different from me. If Chu Mu recovered his memories, he would definitely be shocked. The Dark Night Tribe was actually a miniature version of the Dark Night Galaxy. It didn't exist in the form of a galaxy, but in the form of a village. There were about 30,000 people like him, which meant that there were super geniuses in the Night Darkness Galaxy who had reached the Nirvana realm before the age of 100. Perhaps a small portion of them had not entered the Sky Azure Void world for various reasons. There were only 30,000 people in one galaxy. At first glance, it sounded like a small number. At least in terms of the overall ratio, it was very small. However, don't overlook the fact that these 10,000 people were all super geniuses who had reached at least the first sky of Nirvana realm before the age of 100. Among these 30,000 people, most of them knew about the Sky Azure list ranking battle and took the risk to enter the Nirvana realm. About 20,000 people were like this. The other 10,000 people had a solid foundation. They had accumulated amazing potential through their own continuous accumulation. In the end, they made a proper breakthrough and successfully entered the Nirvana realm, reaching the first sky of Nirvana realm. As for the other geniuses, some of them were just over 100 years old and had exceeded the requirement. Some of them were not even 100 years old and had reached the peak of the ninth sky of Nirvana realm. They had been accumulating for a period of time. In another 1 or 2 years, they would successfully enter the Nirvana realm. After entering the Nirvana realm, they would not be more than 100 years old. These super geniuses were pounding their chests and stamping their feet. This time, they would not be able to participate in the Sky Azure List ranking battle. However, these super geniuses who were not even 100 years old were also working hard and accumulating their own potential. After entering the Nirvana realm, they would advance by leaps and bounds. At that time, they would challenge the geniuses on the Sky Azure List and enter the Sky Azure List. Apart from the 30,000 people, there were other people in the Dark Knight tribe who seemed to belong to the Sky Azure Void world. These people were all people of status. For example, the middle-aged man who was talking to Chu Mu and the other geniuses was the shopkeeper of a bookstore. The books sold in this bookstore were all secret manuals. Secret manuals were cultivation techniques, sword skills, body movements, footwork, and so on. Young friends, would you like to choose a cultivation technique? The shopkeeper of the bookstore asked with a smile. What's the price? Chu Mu asked faintly. I can give you a half-price discount for the first time you choose a cultivation technique. The shopkeeper of the bookstore stroked his long beard and smiled. For example, I can sell you a cultivation technique that costs 100 strands of void chi for 50 strands of void chi. Where does the void chi come from? A young man with long hair asked with a glint in his eyes. There are void beasts living in the wilderness outside the Dark Knight tribe. You can obtain the void chi by killing them. The shopkeeper of the bookstore chuckled. The void chi can not only be used to purchase cultivation techniques, elixir pills, swords, and weapons, but also to assist your own cultivation. It is very important. How strong are the void beasts? Chu Mu asked again after thinking for a while. Although Xiao Chen could not recall his past memories, he vaguely knew that he was not weak in the past. However, for some reason, he had become an ordinary person now. Furthermore, he had 3 years of urging him to work hard. However, as an ordinary person, Xiao Chen was still too weak. He did not know how strong the void beasts were. This was the first time Xiao Chen had heard of it. It was better to be prepared. All right, I will tell you all about the cultivation divisions of the Azure Sky Void world. The shopkeeper of the bookstore smiled and said, the cultivation system here is divided into 2 paths, the chi cultivation path and the body cultivation path. Regardless of whether it is the chi cultivation path or the body cultivation path, the realms are divided into the same 10 heavens. 10 heavens. The geniuses frowned and fell into deep thought. They remembered that the realms were not divided like this. However, the cultivation levels in the Azure Sky Void world were clearly different. The shopkeeper of the bookstore smiled and looked at everyone's reaction. He did not give a detailed explanation. Our human race's cultivation is divided into 10 heavens. As for the void beasts, they are also divided into 10 grades, corresponding to the 10 heavens. These 10 heavens are not divided into elementary, intermediate, or advanced grades, the shopkeeper explained. Everyone listened attentively, wanting to understand more. As for the other details, I will not go into them. However, I have detailed information about the human race's cultivation realms and the strength of void beasts. One book only requires 10 strands of rank 1 void chi. Rank 1 void chi is the void chi of rank 1 void beast. Of course, I know that all of you do not have void chi yet. Hence, I can give you this book that contains detailed information about the human race and void beast. However, you all have to sign a contract with me. Within 10 days, you have to give me double the amount of void chi. The shopkeeper of the bookstore continued smiling. However, this smile was no longer kind in the eyes of the crowd. Instead, it was somewhat treacherous. Oh right. Only one person is allowed to read each book, the shopkeeper of the bookstore added. He still had that smile on his face, but he looked even more despicable now. With just one sentence, the geniuses who wanted to buy the book together immediately gave up on the idea. I want one book. However, it's just 20 strands of rank 1 void chi, a tall and sturdy genius said with a cold smile. I want one too. The way to sign the contract was very simple. All they had to do was press their fingerprint. It did not seem to have any binding force. Chumu also wanted one book. Sharpening the axe would not delay the work of cutting firewood. Furthermore, he also believed that it would not be difficult to obtain rank 1 void chi. The shopkeeper of the bookstore was grinning from ear to ear. One had to know that there were already hundreds of people who had signed the contract to buy the book. Hundreds of people multiplied by 20, that was thousands of strands of rank 1 void chi. Furthermore, according to what he knew, there were more than a few hundred people who had entered this place. Remember, you only have 10 days. If you are unable to give me 20 strands of rank 1 void chi within 10 days, you will die once. The taste of death is not good. Furthermore, you will be weak for 5 days. The shopkeeper of the bookstore laughed again. For some reason, his laughter gave off a demonic feeling. After obtaining the book, Chumu quickly returned to his wooden house. He closed the door, opened the book and started reading. The book was not thick, but the content was indeed very detailed. It was very clear about the human race's chi and body refinement stage 10. There were also records about sword intent and the power of heaven and earth. In addition, the division of void beasts was also very detailed. It also indicated that there were ordinary void beasts, elite void beasts with powerful bloodlines, and even extremely terrifying void beast kings. When one reaches the first layer of refinement, one will possess 10,000 pounds of strength. When one reaches the second layer of refinement, one will possess 20,000 pounds of strength. When one reaches the third layer of refinement, one will possess 40,000 pounds of strength. When one reaches the fourth layer of refinement, one will possess 80,000 pounds of strength. Thus, the strength of each layer will increase exponentially. When one reaches the 10th layer of refinement, their strength will reach a terrifying 5,200,000 pounds. Body refinement stage and chi refinement stage correspond to each other. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages. Ordinary rank 1 void beasts possess an average of 10,000 gene of strength. Elite rank 1 void beasts possess even more strength and speed. They can display even more strength. Void beast kings not only possess tyrannical strength, they also possess beast power, grasp beast skills, and possess a certain level of intelligence. Right now, I don't have any sword chi. My strength is only 500 gene. Compared to the most ordinary rank 1 void beasts, the difference in strength is 10 times. The difference in strength is too great. There is simply no comparison. Chumu could not help but frown. Right now, just a rank 1 void beast was enough to instantly kill him, not to mention hunting void beasts to obtain void chi. Like Chumu, the geniuses who understood the specific situation all frowned. It was almost impossible to accomplish. A difference of 10 times in strength. Just the airflow caused by the attacks would be enough to obstruct them. Flipping to the last page of the book, it was about death. Dying in the Azure Sky virtual world wasn't a true death, because after dying, they would be revived in the tribe. If they were killed without any cultivation, they wouldn't lose anything. However, if they died after reaching the first sky, their cultivation would drop by 1 sky. For example, if a level 1 celestial body died, he would become an ordinary person. If a level 2 celestial body died, he would drop to level 1 celestial body. After reading the last page, Chumu was surprised to find that the words on it had faded and disappeared. When he flipped to the front, it was completely blank. At this point, the geniuses finally understood that obtaining 20 strands of first-grade void chi in 10 days was not a simple matter. Chapter 1208. Almost everyone in the 4 major star zones of the human race and hundreds of galaxies was paying close attention to what was happening in the Heaven Azure virtual world. However, they could not see what was happening in the azure sky illusory world, so they could only wait. Azure sky illusory world, night dark tribe. Chu Mu sat cross-legged on the wooden bed and started to think. The reminder in his mind was like an imprint. It seemed that if he did not reach a certain height within 3 years, something bad would happen. It formed an invisible pressure that urged him to hurry up. Returning 20 strands of rank 1 illusory chi to the bookstore owner within 10 days became the most urgent thing. 20 strands of rank 1 illusory chi. According to the records in the book, killing an ordinary rank 1 illusory beast usually gave only 1 strand of illusory chi. In other words, under normal circumstances, one would have to kill 20 rank 1 illusory beasts to get 20 strands of rank 1 illusory chi. Comparing the difference between himself and a rank 1 illusory beast, Chu Mu knew that at this stage, he did not have any cultivation techniques or powerful sword technique. It was impossible to kill a rank 1 illusory beast with just basic sword technique. However, he knew that if it was his original self, he could easily kill a rank 10 illusory beast. Strength, everything is based on strength. I must have the strength to kill a rank 1 illusory beast within 10 days. Otherwise, I will be punished by dying once and being weak for 5 days. At this stage, dying once was not a loss, but being weak for 5 days was not a small price to pay. After all, 3 years were limited. 5 days was very likely to make him fall behind the starting line. Every second counted. His thinking speed was super fast as he thought about all kinds of ways to increase his strength. Without any cultivation techniques or sword techniques, it was like starting from scratch. However, Chu Mu had his original soul, which was 10 times stronger than an ordinary person. His comprehension and the abilities that were integrated with his soul were all present. The huge pressure also brought a huge motivation. Sword intent, my sword intent is extremely powerful. I have to comprehend sword intent again. As he muttered to himself, Chu Mu's eyes lit up. Soon after, the light receded and his eyes became clear, then deep. He pulled out his sword and placed the jet-black metal sword on his open palm. When it came into direct contact with his palm, the ice-cold feeling was extremely clear. His deep eyes seemed to be able to absorb light as he stared at the iron sword in his hands. Chu Mu's mind also sensed it. Unknowingly, his eyes slowly closed. He calmed his heart and cleared his mind. Only his mind was in contact with the iron sword in his hand. It was as if the world had disappeared and everything had sunk into darkness. Even his heartbeat had become extremely weak. The only thing that remained was a single thought, the sword. That spiritual light gradually became brighter and stronger. It was as if a sword had appeared in the depths of the spiritual light. Sword. What is a sword? Suddenly, a voice sounded from the void. It was very soft, as if someone was whispering. What is a sword? The voice suddenly grew louder. What is a sword? His voice was like a sudden clap of thunder, roaring through the ages. What is a sword? It was earth-shattering. What is a sword? Heaven and earth were shattered, and the sun and moon were destroyed. It was the same question, but the voice asked it over and over again. Each time, it was grander and grander than the last. Its aura surged and shook Chu Mu's mind. The light was like a candle flame that was blown by the wind. As it swayed, it seemed to be about to be extinguished. A fine crack appeared on the sword in the spiritual light, and it was almost broken. What is a sword? Once again, the voice was so vast that it was indescribable. With a roar, even the universe was about to be destroyed. The sword in the spiritual light cracked and shattered. As the spiritual light swayed, it was extinguished. Chu Mu's mind was also shattered in an instant. The sharpness is a sword, in the darkness a weak voice sounded. Suddenly, a little bit of spiritual light appeared, like a firefly in the dark night, like a spark in the ashes. Killing is a sword, the indifferent voice sounded again, with an indescribable firmness. Suddenly, a little bit of weak spiritual light burst out, turning from a spark into a flame. "A sword is a sword," an incomparably firm voice sounded, and a tyrannical aura of sharpness surged from the void and poured out. The mighty flow of sharpness could destroy eternity. It was as if oil had been poured on the flame of spiritual light. It suddenly became blazing hot and began to burn fiercely. In the depths of the flame, another ray of light was born. As the light flowed, it formed a long strip, as if it was containing something. A sword is a sword. A sword has a sharp point, which can be pierced and is incomparably sharp. A sword has a sharp edge, which can be cut and is shockingly sharp. A sword has a blade, which can be slashed and is incomparably sharp. A sword has a body, which can be swept and destroyed. A sword has a pool, which can be blocked. A sword has a handle, which can be grasped. A sword has a head, which can be used to assist. As this vast and indifferent voice sounded, the ray of light in the depths of the raging flames gradually revealed its original appearance. The light faded bit by bit, revealing a sword tip. It was incomparably sharp and could pierce through all hardness. Then, the sword tip slowly revealed itself. It was incomparably sharp and could cut through all defenses. The light continued to fade, revealing the blade. It was astonishingly sharp and could cut through everything. The body of the sword was revealed. It was a blazing sword body that contained astonishing tenacity. As it swept across, its power was astonishing and could destroy all things. The words spoken by the voice seemed to have used great power to forge the sword. The sword had a gauntlet which could be used to block attacks. The sword had a hilt, which allowed the user to wield it. When using the sword in battle, one could unleash the sharpness of the sword itself. The sword had a head, which was the balance of the sovereign sword, and could be used to counterattack. A complete sword appeared in the flame of spiritual light. A sword is a murderous weapon, mainly used to kill. The last sentence seemed to be the conclusion. The flame of spiritual light shrank and the sword emitted an intense light. The terrifying sharpness was like a blazing sun, illuminating the surroundings and dispelling the darkness. Suddenly, Chu Mu's tightly shut eyes opened. Two incomparably sharp glints shot out like formless and colorless sword auras. The air was pierced through, and the iron sword resting on his palms trembled. A sword cry rang out, sounding high-spirited and joyful. Traces of sharpness surrounded Chu Mu's body, cutting through everything. You have comprehended the beginner level of sword intent. You have received 1,000 genius points. A voice sounded. With a thought, the sharpness was like an invisible sword energy that shot out and cut through the corner of the wooden table. It silently cut through it like cutting through tofu. The cut was smooth and flat. This is sword intent. I've once again grasped sword intent. The light in Chu Mu's eyes dimmed. Sword intent wasn't based on sword aura, body, or soul. Instead, it was closely related to the three. It was the convergence of essence, energy, and soul. It was the product of the sword's power reaching a certain level. Sword intent was an invisible force that was incomparably sharp. It could break through the toughness of the body, destroy the heart's demons, and eliminate all negative emotions. Sword intent was the symbol of a true swordsman. The current Chu Mu had an ordinary physique and no chi cultivation, but he had comprehended sword intent again. A newly comprehended sword intent is actually so pure. Compared to the original top divine rank sword intent, although it's much weaker, it's much purer. Vaguely, Chu Mu seemed to have comprehended something, but he couldn't grasp it. I wonder if I can kill a grade 1 void beast with the sword intent I have now? Chu Mu thought to himself. His gaze seemed to pierce through the wooden house, looking outside the Dark Knight tribe. The moment Chu Mu comprehended sword intent, the aborigines of the Dark Knight tribe seemed to have felt something, and their bodies trembled. Then, above the Dark Knight tribe, azure light gathered and condensed into a list. At the top of the list were 5 words, Galaxy's Genius List. Below those 5 words, a row of words appeared. Chu-Mu, 5 elements sword sex esoteric disciple. Below that, it was a blank space. At the same time, on the night-darkness galaxy, the Dominator and Overlord forces, as well as other forces of various sizes, all had their disciples enter the Sky Azure virtual world. The Azure virtual world was filled with azure light. The azure light spread out and formed a huge ranking list. Galaxy's Genius List. 5 words appeared, grand and majestic, ancient and vicissitudes of life, making people feel suffocated. Below the Galaxy's Genius List appeared Chu-Mu, 5 elements sword sex esoteric disciple genius points, 1000. It's our sword sex senior brother. Our sword sex senior brother Chu is too awesome. The disciples of the 5 elements sword sect cheered, while the other esoteric disciples of the 5 elements sword sect had different expressions. As for the senior members, they were very happy. The Galaxy's Genius List, as the name suggested, was a list of the geniuses of a galaxy. The Dark Knight Galaxy had the Sovereign Realm Dark Knight Sword Sect, the 10 overlords and many other forces of various sizes, and there were countless geniuses. The first person to appear on the Galaxy's Genius List was a disciple of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, which immediately caused a huge uproar. The people of the Dark Knight Sword Sect found it hard to believe. They were the sovereigns of the Dark Knight Galaxy and had more geniuses than the other forces, so they should be first on the Galaxy's Genius List. Is there a mistake on the Galaxy's Genius List? It can't be wrong, but it's okay to have the upper hand for a while. The real hero is the one who has the last laugh. I think Chu-Mu is just lucky to have the upper hand for a while. Zhu Tiantong, Chun Gang and the other senior brothers of the Dark Knight Sword Sect will soon surpass him and trample him under their feet. There were all kinds of discussions. Chu-Mu, this name sounds familiar. The 10th divine child's name is also Chu-Mu. Is it the same person? Definitely not. In other galaxies, the Galaxy's Genius List appeared one after another. There was at least one name on each Galaxy's Genius List, and all of them were geniuses who had comprehended sword intent. Galaxy's Genius List, Chu-Mu, esoteric disciple of the 5 Elements Sword Sect. I have no impression of him at all. What's going on? Why is there a Galaxy's Genius List? Many geniuses in the Dark Knight tribe saw the cyan list in the sky above the tribe and were puzzled. How can one be listed on the Galaxy's Genius List? What is the genius point? This question immediately made the geniuses ponder. Those who could participate in the Heaven Genius List were no fools. Chapter 1209. The door to the wooden hut opened and a figure walked out. This figure gave off a sharp aura, but as he walked, he gradually withdrew it. After 3 steps, he regained his calm. Chu-Mu held the iron sword in his left hand and walked out of the night underworld tribe. After comprehending sword intent, Chu-Mu planned to leave the night underworld tribe and test the strength of a rank 1 foe beast to see if he could kill one. Eventually, he would have to take that step. The deadline was 10 days. Half a day had already passed, so the time was very precious. Damn it! Foe beasts are too strong. Although I can predict their attacks, it is hard to dodge them. If I had the strength of my main body, I would be able to instantly kill 1000 rank 1 foe beasts with 1 sword slash. Along the way, Chu-Mu heard many discussions. Above him, there were already people who took the risk of leaving the night underworld tribe and entering the wilderness, but they were killed by foe beasts. Let's work together. With more people working together, we will definitely be able to kill foe beasts with our combat experience and sword technique. Basically, every genius had 500 kilograms of physical strength. This was what they relied on. Naturally, it was impossible to use 500 kilograms of physical strength to fight against 10,000 kilograms of physical strength. However, humans had intelligence, and ordinary foe beasts had no intelligence, only bestial instincts. Furthermore, the geniuses only had their memories of cultivation techniques and sword techniques sealed. If foe beasts only had 500 kilograms of physical strength, they would not be a match for the geniuses. With 500 kilograms of physical strength and basic sword techniques, their strength would be extraordinary. "Brother, are you going out to hunt foe beasts?" someone asked directly as he blocked Chu Mu's path. "What advice do you have?" Chu Mu asked indifferently. "Brother, you still don't know how powerful foe beasts are, right? Right now, we are no match for foe beasts. How about you work together with us to deal with foe beasts? The foe chi you obtain will be distributed according to your contribution," this person said with assurance. He used this method to gather a few people. "I'm used to traveling alone," Chu Mu said, rejecting the other party. "That's a pity." After being rejected, this person's eyes flashed with a bright light. Then, he smiled and returned to his team. When the other teams saw that Chu Mu had rejected them, they didn't say anything. The perimeter of the Dark Knight tribe was very simple. It was a fence made of thigh-thick logs, with an open door as the exit. After walking out, he first saw a river that was 100 meters wide. On the river, there was a wooden arch bridge that connected the two sides. The water flowed slowly and was so clear that one could see the bottom. Fishes could be seen swimming around. They were as small as a finger and as big as a meter. They looked very plump. Looking at those fishes, Chu Mu suddenly had a thought. He would be hungry, although he didn't feel it now. "That's right. Right now, I have the body of an ordinary person. It's normal for me to feel hungry." Xiao Qian thought to himself as he walked across the wooden bridge and entered the wilderness. There were strong auras in the wilderness, and he could even see some foe beasts. On the other side of the wooden bridge, the geniuses who were working together sneered when they saw Chu Mu cross the wooden bridge alone. Some of them had experienced it personally, while others had seen people being torn apart by foe beasts with their own eyes. Even though they had impressive attainments in swordsmanship and combat techniques, their cultivation bases couldn't keep up. Their thinking was also limited due to their insufficient cultivation bases. When facing an enemy 10 times stronger than them, they simply couldn't display their abilities. "He will definitely die a miserable death. I won't accept him if he begs me to work together again." The genius who had invited Chu Mu but had been rejected sneered. Just as Chu Mu walked out of the Dark Knight tribe and entered the wilderness, the Galaxy Genius list above the Dark Knight tribe changed again. Another name appeared below Chu Mu's name. Zhu Tiantong's esoteric disciple genius points of the Dark Knight sword sect. 1000. After 10 seconds, another name appeared. Chun Gang's esoteric disciple genius points of the Dark Knight sword sect. 1000. The time they took to comprehend the sword intent was an hour longer than Chu Mu. Before long, another name appeared below Chun Gang's. Names sprung up one after another on the Galaxy Genius list like bamboo shoots after a rain. All of them had 1000 genius points. As for Chu Mu, he had already walked into the wilderness and was facing a void beast. It was a gray wolf that was more than a meter long. Its eyes were red and filled with bloodlust as it stared at Chu Mu. It lowered its head and opened its mouth. Turbid saliva dripped down and a terrifying growl came from the depths of its throat. Its body was half-crouched like a bow that had been pulled to its limit, ready to shoot. This was an ordinary Grade 1 foe beast, the red-eyed wolf. Chu Mu's breathing gradually slowed down and became longer. The power of this body had been fully mobilized by him as he walked over. The instincts of a swordsman had already penetrated deep into his soul. His application of power was unparalleled. He didn't have the slightest bit of fear. He even had a feeling that he could easily kill the red-eyed wolf in front of him. Chu Mu knew that this was actually his subconscious mind causing mischief. It was his memories causing mischief. The person who could easily kill the red-eyed wolf was his past self, and not his current body. He was fully focused and used all his strength to deal with the red-eyed wolf. Many people walked to the wooden bridge and looked over. With a low growl, the crimson-eyed wolf launched an attack. Its 4 limbs abruptly exerted strength, and like a spring, its body shot out like an arrow towards Chu Mu. The short distance of 7 to 8 meters was crossed in the blink of an eye. The crimson-eyed wolf opened its mouth, revealing its malevolent fangs. It bit towards Chu Mu's neck, wanting to break it in one bite. I died from this bite. On the wooden bridge, a person gritted his teeth and said, "The feeling of having his neck bitten off was unforgettable. He will also die from the fangs of the red-eyed wolf." The person who was rejected by Chu Mu cursed. In an instant, the scarlet-eyed wolf's fangs were just inches away. Chu Mu could clearly smell the thick stench. His pupils instantly contracted, and the strength in his body burst forth in an instant. His leg muscles trembled, and with an incomparably dangerous difference, he took a big step back to increase the distance between them. He unsheathed his iron sword. With a flick of his wrist, the sword trembled violently. Under the vibration, it turned into a sharp sword and slashed out. The trajectory was perfect, showing off Chu Mu's attainments in swordsmanship to the fullest. The crimson-eyed wolf's strength was powerful, and under its explosive speed, its speed was extremely fast. Although Chu Mu used his instincts to increase his speed to dodge, his throat was still scratched and blood seeped out. Just a little bit more and his throat would have been bitten through. The vibration sword accurately slashed at the red-eyed wolf's neck. Immediately, Chu Mu felt a kind of toughness that couldn't be cut. The powerful vibration sword only caused the red-eyed wolf's body to fall to the side. It only slightly cut open the gray fur on its neck, and caused a slight injury. After all, the red-eyed wolf was a rank 1 void beast. Not only did it have a terrifying strength of 10,000 gene, its fur was also very tough and its defense was shocking. With the sharpness of the sword, it was almost impossible to cut it open. The red-eyed wolf landed on the ground and twisted its body. It once again soared into the sky and opened its sharp front claws, grabbing at Chu Mu. It wanted to tear Chu Mu apart. This scene made the faces of the geniuses change. This was because they had been torn apart like this. They had to admit that it was funny. In their memories, they had tyrannical strength, but here they were torn apart by a rank 1 void beast. The difference was very obvious. The sharp claws were extremely fast. Because Chu Mu had used the vibration power, the muscles in his calf and right arm felt like they were being torn apart. He couldn't do it a second time. Unable to dodge, Lin Yun waved the sword sheath in his left hand and blocked the red-eyed wolf's sharp claws. A huge force shook, and the web between the thumb and forefinger of his left hand seemed to have split open. The sword sheath shattered, and Lin Yun took a step back. He activated his sword intent and stabbed out. The cold sword light condensed into a point and pierced through the air, piercing into the red-eyed wolf's left eye. Lin Yun twisted his wrist and twisted it. The red-eyed wolf's body suddenly twitched, and its front claws became weak. He forcefully pulled out his sword and kicked the red-eyed wolf's head, sending it flying and landing on the ground. Chu Mu's sword was 3 inches deep. Not only did it pierce through the red-eyed wolf's left eye, it also pierced through its brain. The formless sword intent minced its brain. Void beasts had a strong vitality. After the brain was crushed and fell to the ground, it didn't die immediately. Chu Mu rushed up and raised his sword. He activated his sword intent and chopped down, cutting off the red-eyed wolf's neck. Blood splattered everywhere. Immediately, a gray aura floated out from the red-eyed wolf's corpse. Lin Yun stretched out his left hand and grabbed the gray aura. The gray aura twisted, trying to break free from Chu Mu's hand. Lin Yun opened his mouth and swallowed the gray aura. An indescribable burning sensation spread down his throat, as if he had swallowed a piece of burning coal. The void chi dissolved in Lin Yun's body, and a burning sensation spread out to his limbs and bones. Immediately, the muscles of his calf, right arm, and the web between his thumb and forefinger felt a tearing pain. He felt numb, but after 3 breaths, he recovered completely. When the burning sensation disappeared, Chu Mu felt that his body seemed to have become stronger. The book that cost 20 strands of rank 1 void chi had records of void chi. Void Qi could be used as currency or to assist in cultivation, be it body tempering or Qi tempering. It could also be used to recover energy. Furthermore, it could be used to treat injuries. It was very versatile. Chu Mu did not have any cultivation techniques, and his muscles were slightly injured because of the vibration force. That was why he used Void Qi to heal himself. Unexpectedly, not only did he recover, but his body also became stronger. My strength has reached about 2,000 jin, and I have improved in all aspects. Chu Mu estimated. As for the others, they were all dumbfounded. Lin Yun had killed a red-eyed wolf alone. This was simply unbelievable. Sword intent. He must have mastered sword intent again. Someone shouted. If I had mastered sword intent, I could have done it too. What an exquisite sword technique. The people with even sharper gazes exclaimed in admiration at the sword technique Chu Mu displayed. It was a matter of having a bit more or a bit less. Without this level of sword technique, even if one grasped sword intent, wanting to kill a red-eyed wolf alone wouldn't be that easy. Comparing all aspects of strength, there was a clear difference. As if they had been inspired by Chu Mu, the geniuses began to rush into the wilderness in groups of 3 to 5. Chapter 12:10. How dare a Grade 1 Void Beast bare its fangs and claws in front of me? After killing a Grade 1 Void Beast, Lien Hongyun shook off the blood on her sword, grabbed the Void Qi, and swallowed it. Similar scenes were happening everywhere in the Azure Sky virtual world. In the Night Dark tribe, 1,000 names appeared on the Galaxy Genius list formed by the green light in the sky. 1,000 names was the upper limit. Chu Mu was at the top of the list, followed by Zhu Tiantong and Chen Gang. When the Galaxy Genius list was full, the geniuses on the list would be able to know the ranking of the Galaxy Genius list. Chu Mu, the first place of a mere hegemon rank sword sect's secret inheritance will be temporarily held by you. Very soon, it will be mine. Zhu Tiantong laughed coldly and said. Like Zhu Tiantong, many geniuses who were confident in themselves said the same thing. Getting first place did not cause Chu Mu to lose his rationality. He remained calm and did not feel surprised at all. Chu Mu continued to hunt first-rank void beasts. So far, he had killed the third red-eyed wolf alone. The first time he fought with a crimson-eyed wolf, due to the huge disparity between his physique and that of the crimson-eyed wolf, he had no choice but to use the power of vibration and sword intent in order to kill it. After killing a crimson-eyed wolf, he absorbed a surge of ethereal energy. Not only did the injuries he had sustained from using the power of vibration heal, his physique had also improved. With this upgrade, Chu Mu had improved in all aspects. Being a sword master had already become an instinct for him, and he was adept at using the upgraded abilities in all aspects. His strength had clearly increased. The second time he faced the red-eyed wolf, it was easier for him to kill it. After absorbing another strand of void aura, his strength was even stronger, reaching the standard of 3,000 jin. The difference between 1,000 kilograms of strength and 10,000 kilograms of strength was very clear. If he didn't have the vibrating energy imprinted in his soul and the newly comprehended sword intent, even if Chu Mu had an incomparably exquisite sword technique and exquisite fighting technique, he still wouldn't be able to kill the red-eyed wolf. After all, the sharpness of the metal sword in his hand wasn't enough to break through the red-eyed wolf's tough fur. After killing the third red-eyed wolf and absorbing the third wisp of void qi, Chu Mu felt that his physique had improved and his strength had reached 2,000 jin. The stronger one's physique was, the more powerful one's strength would be, and the more powerful one's vibrational force would be. More and more people rushed into the wilderness. Most of them were in groups of at least 5 people. With 5 geniuses working together, each of them possessed exceptional battle experience and skills. They were also extremely familiar with swordsmanship, possessing profound mastery over basic swordsmanship, and their ability to utilize their strength far surpassed that of ordinary cultivators. With the 5 of them working together, they were more than capable of dealing with a crimson-eyed wolf and slaying it. As long as they killed a crimson-eyed wolf and obtained a wisp of ethereal chi, one of them would be able to absorb it to strengthen their physique. With the increase in their strength, they would be able to continue hunting for more ethereal chi, thus increasing their success rate and speed. Crimson-eyed wolves rarely gathered in pack. If they were alone, they would be relatively easy to kill. They encountered another red-eyed wolf. When it saw Chu Mu, it immediately attacked ferociously. Chu Mu stared at the red-eyed wolf. The strengthening of the void chi had strengthened his physique. With the improvement of his physique, his thinking speed had also increased. After comprehending the sword intent, his thinking speed had become even faster. His eyes were sharp and his six senses were strengthened. Grasping the red-eyed wolf's trajectory, Shao Qin executed a slash with his sword intent. With a light flick of his wrist, he activated the vibrational force. With a poochie sound, the incomparably sharp sword cut through the red-eyed wolf's throat. Under the huge vibrational force, the red-eyed wolf's body was sent flying to the side. Blood gushed out from its throat. After killing the fourth red-eyed wolf, Shao Qin obtained another wisp of ethereal chi. After absorbing it, his physique was strengthened once more. 5,000 gene of strength. The difference between Shao Qin's 5,000 gene of strength and the red-eyed wolf's 5,000 gene of strength was double. However, for an expert like Chu Mu who was proficient in using every ounce of strength, the might of his 5,000 gene of strength was stronger than the red-eyed wolf's 5,000 gene of strength. After all, the red-eyed wolf was a beast. It did not have much intelligence, only the instincts of a beast. "I'm a little hungry. Let's hunt one more before returning to the Night Dark tribe," Chu Mu thought to himself. He looked at the sky and saw that the blazing sun had already turned into the setting sun. The light was not that bright anymore. Clearly, it was going to be dusk soon. In another 2 hours it would be night. It was recorded in that book that the wilderness at night was 10 times more dangerous than during the day. The wilderness that was 10 times more dangerous was even more terrifying. Chu Mu was not so reckless as to think that he could survive in the wilderness at night. Suddenly, his mind trembled. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu's eyes shone with a terrifying light. His face was filled with shock. There was actually someone who had already reached the first celestial layer. Whether it was chi refinement or body refinement, to reach the first celestial layer in just half a day was extremely shocking. According to the situation where absorbing one wisp of ethereal chi would increase 1,000 gene of strength, in order to reach the first celestial layer, one would have to absorb 9 wisps of ethereal chi, increasing one's strength from 1,000 gene to 10,000 gene. Chu Mu felt that his speed was already not slow. However, he had only killed 4 red-eyed wolves and increased his strength to 5,000 gene. There are really geniuses coming out in large numbers. Demons are everywhere. I cannot underestimate them, Shao Qin muttered to himself. He also could not think of a way to kill 9 red-eyed wolves and obtain 9 wisps of ethereal chi in such a short period of time. As if his fighting spirit had been aroused, Chu Mu felt his blood flow accelerate slightly. He felt a little excited and a little stimulated. This kind of competition was interesting. Otherwise, if one was far ahead and no one could compare, one would eventually feel lonely, without pressure and without motivation. As the first genius reached the first celestial layer, green light gathered above the vital planets of the 4 major galaxies of the human race. It formed a list that was 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times larger than the Galaxy Genius list. The list slowly opened from top to bottom, as if a curtain had been opened. The Heaven Ascension List. The 3 large words seemed to be burning with green and golden flames. Everyone on the vital planet could see them. The Heaven Ascension List. Everyone was shocked. The 3 large words had the power of heaven and earth condensed. It was vast and boundless, grand and majestic. The Heaven Ascension List. You have reached the heavens in a single step, an almighty exclaimed. On the Heaven Ascension list, a bright golden light bloomed under the 3 large words. It condensed like an invisible pen and drew a name. Gu Luankong's Genius Points, 3,000. After the name, there were only genius points and nothing else. Therefore, many people did not know where Gu Luankong came from. Normally, when a disciple of a sect or family was listed on the list, other than the name, there would also be a disciple of a sect or family behind it. This was decided at the time of the registration. There were only 2 possibilities for the contestants who did not have a name. One was a free swordsman who did not belong to any force. The other was that he did not belong to any force but had a powerful backer, such as a descendant of a great emperor. Obviously, it was impossible for the free sword cultivator to be ranked first on the Heaven Ascension list. He was ranked first among the millions of geniuses who had entered the Heaven Azure empty world. A more accurate guess was that Gu Luankong was the descendant of some great emperor. The descendants of some great emperors were more outstanding than the divine sons. After about 15 minutes, the second name appeared on the Heaven Ascension list. Qin Ao's Genius Points, 3,000. Like Gu Luankong, he did not have a name. He might be the descendant of a great emperor. Within 2 hours, names appeared one after another. There was a total of 10 names. Chu Mu held the 3 streaks of ethereal qi in his left hand. He held the black iron sword in his right hand and looked at the dark sky. He turned around and walked back to the Dark Night tribe. Gu Luankong, Qin Ao Xian, Yang Zhantian. As he walked back to the Dark Night tribe, he murmured the 10 names that appeared on the Heaven Ascension list. Chu Mu's eyes became brighter and brighter. Up until now, he had killed 7 red-eyed wolves and obtained 7 streaks of ethereal qi. He had absorbed 4 streaks of ethereal qi. He did not plan to absorb the remaining 3 streaks of ethereal qi as he was very hungry and needed to eat. Perhaps the 3 streaks of ethereal qi would come in handy. The wilderness was more dangerous at night. The swordsmen all returned. Brother, please lend the ethereal qi in your hand to us for now. We will pay you back double the amount in the future. Just as Chu Mu walked across the wooden bridge, someone blocked his way. He glanced at Chu Mu's left hand with a sharp gaze and met Chu Mu's eyes. I have a use for them, Chu Mu said. Even if the other party would pay him back double the amount in a short time, he would not lend out the 3 streaks of ethereal qi. He did have a use for them. At this moment, everyone wanted ethereal qi, even if it was just a first-grade ethereal qi. Sir, I am Qiu Minglei, the esoteric disciple of the Dark Night Sword sect. I am ranked 87th on the Galaxy Genius list. I promise with my integrity that if you lend me the ethereal qi now, I will pay you back double the amount in the future. This person did not give up. He mentioned his background and his ranking on the Galaxy Genius list as if he was trying to make himself more persuasive. In fact, he was threatening Yi Futian. Oh, 87th. I thought you were Gu Luankong, Chu Mu said lightly, which made Qiu Minglei's face turn sour. Don't be too arrogant when you see me all the time, Qiu Minglei said coldly. He did not know Chu Mu's identity, but he was a genius and an esoteric disciple of the Dark Night Sword sect. He was also ranked in the top 100 on the Galaxy Genius list. He had the right to be arrogant. I am that arrogant. Qiu Minglei's words caused Chu Mu to laugh involuntarily. He couldn't help but sigh. Even amongst geniuses there were people who lacked brains. Perhaps their brains were damaged from training. I'm called Chu Mu. If you don't like me and want to teach me a lesson, I won't object. Chu Mu. Qiu Minglei's pupils contracted. The others around him were also shocked. There were more than 30,000 geniuses in the Dark Night tribe. Chu Mu was ranked first on the Galaxy Genius list. Everyone knew about him, but not many people knew who he was. Looking at Chu Mu's back, Qiu Minglei clenched his teeth. He felt embarrassed being watched by so many people. He hated Chu Mu. Chapter 12:11. To Chu Mu, Qiu Minglei was just a small interlude. In the Night Dark tribe, there were restaurants and small restaurants. The cost of the restaurants was shocking. Chu-Mu chose the small restaurant. One rank one void chi could only be eaten for a very ordinary meal. 2 vegetables, 1 meat, 1 soup, 1 bowl of rice, and 3 big white steamed buns. Although it was simple, the taste was not bad. He could eat until he was full. As for the other 2 rank 1 void chi, Chu-Mu bought some water and dry food from the small restaurant for tomorrow's meal. An ordinary person's body needed to eat at least 1 full meal a day. Otherwise, it would affect their strength. After eating, Chu-Mu left the small restaurant directly. He walked around for a while and then went to the bookstore. "Young friend, you are indeed extraordinary," the bookstore owner said with a smile. 20 rank 1 void chi. I will give them to you in a few days. Chu-Mu said. There is no rush. I believe in your strength. The bookstore owner said with a smile. I have body refining technique and chi refining technique here. Do you need them? I don't have void chi. Chu-Mu said. Of course, he needed them. It was just that he didn't have void chi. With your talent, it won't be difficult for you to kill void beasts and obtain void chi. Consider it my investment first. The bookstore owner said with a smile. I can give you the techniques first. You only need to pay me double the amount of void chi within a month. How much void chi does the body refining technique and chi refining technique cost? Chu-Mu asked. The body refining technique and chi refining technique here are divided into 3 levels: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. The shopkeeper smiled and said, Elementary level chi refining and body tempering technique costs 100 first grade void energy. Intermediate level chi refining and body tempering technique costs 1000 second grade void energy. Advanced level chi refining and body tempering technique costs 10,000 third grade void energy. Shopkeeper, I remember you said that the first time you buy a technique, you only need to pay half the price. Chu-Mu said. Yes, but that is under the condition that you buy it directly with void chi. Credit is not included. The bookstore owner said calmly. Primary chi cultivation technique and body tempering technique. Chu-Mu said. The shopkeeper was stunned. He thought that Chu-Mu would bargain with him, but he didn't expect him to be so straightforward. Young friend, although cultivating both chi and chi is stronger, it takes more time and resources, the bookstore manager kindly reminded him. Chi cultivation required resources, body cultivation required resources, and both required time. It was not easy. Chu-Mu was well aware of this point. However, he also understood that he had always been cultivating both chi and body cultivation. Only then could he better display his own abilities and become stronger. The shopkeeper was just reminding him. After Chu-Mu pressed his fingerprint on the contract, he took the 2 books, one blue and one yellow. Shopkeeper, I also want a basic chi refinement cultivation technique. A genius who passed by immediately said to the shopkeeper after seeing it. Are you on the genius ranking? The bookstore manager asked. No. The genius didn't understand, but he still answered. I'll wait until you're on the genius ranking, then I'll give you credit. The shopkeeper was still smiling, but his answer was so unkind. Holding the 2 basic chi refinement cultivation techniques, Chu-Mu quickly left and returned to his wooden house. The sun had already set. Inside the Dark Night tribe, the lights were also lit. Inside the wooden house, Chu-Mu lit up the lampstand. The fire spread out and illuminated the entire house. He first picked up the yellow book. It was a basic body tempering technique. The name was also very straightforward. It was called Primary Body Tempering Technique. After opening it, he started reading from the first page. There were words and pictures of human bodies. There were a total of 9 pages. Each page corresponded to an action. There were a total of 9 actions. The first one was the easiest, the second one was more difficult, the third one was more difficult, and the 9th one was the last one, which was the most difficult. After reading it, the contents of the book completely disappeared. It became a blank book. Not immediately practicing the primary body tempering technique, Chu Mu picked up the blue book next to him. It was the primary qi refinement technique. There were also 9 pages. There were words and pictures of a human body sitting cross-legged. The pictures were marked with red dots and red lines, which represented the path of cultivation and the related acupuncture points. Although he had never come into contact with this kind of cultivation technique, Chu Mu's strong perception allowed him to quickly understand it. Let's practice the body tempering technique first. Silently muttering, Chu Mu walked to the center of the wooden hut. In the not-so-wide area, he stood still. After adjusting his breathing, he raised both of his arms, took a step forward, and with a twist of his waist, he slowly assumed the first movement of the beginner-level body training technique. With his amazing perception and control of his body, Chu Mu immediately made an accurate action. He fixed the action, as if he had become a statue, motionless. According to what was written, one needed to be motionless for at least a quarter of an hour in order to achieve the body tempering technique's effect. Chu Mu's action was completely in line with the standard. As time passed, he gradually felt a numbing sensation throughout his body. It was uncomfortable, as if his whole body was itching, but he couldn't reach out to scratch it. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. He could only endure this discomfort. After a quarter of an hour, the uncomfortable feeling became very intense. If not for his strong will, he would have already failed. After a quarter of an hour, suddenly, the intense discomfort quickly receded like a tide. It was replaced by a warm current. It was as if a warm current flowed from the deepest part of his body. It was fine like a trickle of water, slowly flowing through every part of his body. As time passed, it became more and more obvious, more and more intense. Finally, he felt as if his whole body was soaked in hot spring water. If possible, Chu Mu was willing to maintain this action until dawn. Unfortunately, he couldn't. After about half an hour, the warm current reached its peak. Waves of tearing pain came from every part of his body, becoming more and more intense. Every second was like torture, as if he was in hell. Chu Mu hurriedly stopped this action. When the warm current disappeared, the pain also slowly disappeared. Cultivation wasn't without limit. Having a balance between tension and relaxation was the way of the king. Feeling pain meant that he had reached his limit. If he continued, it would only harm his body. After a short rest, Chu Mu tried the second action. Although it was also accurate, the difficulty was clearly 30% higher than the first action. After the second action was completed, he moved on to the third action. The difficulty was once again 30% higher, but Chu Mu still accurately completed it. The fourth action, the fifth action completed. After the sixth action, he began to encounter a bottleneck. It was extremely difficult. Every time he moved, his entire body ached, as if his muscles were about to be torn apart. Chu Mu knew that he had reached his limit. He had to make a breakthrough. After completing the fifth action, Chu Mu felt his entire body relax. His entire body felt comfortable. His strength, speed, explosiveness, and all other aspects had increased. It was as if the potential of his body had been unlocked. At this time, it was already late in the night. He could vaguely hear the howls of wolves coming from the wilderness. It was cold and gloomy, causing one to shudder. Countless red-eyed wolves wandered around the wilderness, looking for prey. After completing the body transformation, Chu Mu sat cross-legged on his wooden bed and began to practice the elementary qi refining technique. Eliminating distracting thoughts, breathing evenly, calming his mind. With a thought, he followed the qi refining technique's mantra and stimulated the first acupoint, arousing a trace of potential. This was not an easy task. It would take some time before he could succeed in cultivating it. In addition to Chu Mu, there were other geniuses who obtained the elementary cultivation technique from the bookstore owner at different prices. Those geniuses who were listed on the Galaxy Genius list paid a different price compared to those who were not. Although the intermediate and advanced cultivation techniques were better, the price was too high. There was no guarantee that he could pay it back within a month. If he could not pay it back, the price would be very serious. He would die once and be weak for 5 days. After a month, he would at least reach the first layer. If he died, he would return to his original state and be weak for 5 days. It would be difficult to compete with other geniuses. After practicing for 2 hours, he felt his legs go numb. His blood and qi were not flowing smoothly, but he could already feel qi. He got up and practiced the first 5 actions of the body transformation technique. His body was warm and full of vitality. Outside, the sky was also bright. He unsheathed his sword and swung it instinctively. After practicing the swordsmanship for a while, he washed up and went out with the sword upside down, water, and dry food. He had no choice. The scabbard was broken when he fought with the red-eyed wolf yesterday. The moment he stepped out of the door, he didn't walk far before someone called out to him. "Senior Brother Chu, we are all secret disciples of the 5 Elements Sword Sect. We plan to join forces to form a force called the 5 Elements Sect. Senior Brother Chu, you are the first on the Galaxy Genius list of the Night Nether tribe. You can be the leader of the 5 Elements Sect," a dark-skinned swordsman said to Chu Mu. The others also looked at Chu Mu. "I'm not good at leading," Chu Mu declined tactfully. "However, if the 5 Elements Sect is established, I'm willing to be a member." "That's great. With Senior Brother Chu joining, the 5 Elements Sect will definitely be extraordinary," the dark-skinned swordsman said. "I'll go out to hunt void beasts first. If there's anything else, we can talk about it at night," Chu Mu said. "I live in cabin 1300. In the Night Nether tribe, the wooden cabins where the genius swordsmen lived were all numbered. Okay, I wish Senior Brother Chu a fruitful return." After bidding farewell to the secret disciples of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, Chu Mu quickly walked out of the Night Nether tribe. He crossed the wooden bridge and walked into the wilderness again. There were still a lot of void beasts chi. In addition to the disciples of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, the secret disciples of the other forces also had the idea of forming a small force and started to take action. Among them, the Dominator Force, the Night Nether Sword Sect, and the other 10 Overlord forces were the main forces. After all, most of the 1,000 people on the Galaxy Genius list belonged to the Night Nether Sword Sect and the other 10 Overlord forces. A small number of them were the geniuses of other forces.